Mr. True Crime.
Some cases are unforgettable, especially when they come with twists you'd never expect. Today, we're sharing 3 incredible stories: a teen's daring escape, hidden secrets, and dark truths finally revealed. Let's dive in. Our first story is about Cara Robinson, a courageous 15-year-old who escaped a serial killer's grasp. Her bravery helped bring a predator to justice. Here's how it all unfolded.
Big mood shift here. She was kidnapped by a serial killer, a man who took the lives of at least 3 teenage girls.
Strained my wrists and my ankles, and then gagged me. And then he actually put the lid all the way on.
The morning of June 2002 dawned like any other summer day in Columbia, South Carolina. The air was warm, carrying the soft hum of a neighborhood waking up. For 15-year-old Cara Robinson Chamberlain, it was a day of freedom and possibilities. She was spending time with her best friend Heather, savoring the unstructured days that summer allowed. The two had no concrete plans, but the idea of heading to the lake had come up. A typical carefree outing for 2 teenagers looking to make the most of their break. Before they could set off, Heather's mom asked them for a favor: to water the plants in the yard before they left. It was a small chore that Cara volunteered while Heather got ready. As her friend went to take a shower, Cara stepped outside into the yard. The task was simple, almost meditative. Cara relished the peaceful moment. As Cara moved from one patch of flowers to the next, she was drawn to a car slowly driving past the house. It was a green Trans Am, blending into the suburban scenery. At first, she barely noticed it, but moments later, the car circled back and pulled into the driveway. Her pulse sped up a bit, but she shrugged it off. Cars turned around in driveways all the time. A man got out of the car, looking calm and harmless. He seemed to be in his late 30s, wearing a button-down shirt tucked into jeans and a baseball cap that shaded his face. He held some brochures or magazines in his hands and walked toward her with a forced smile. Nothing about him stood out, and Cara assumed he was just a door-to-door salesperson or someone handing out flyers. "Is your mum or dad home?" the man asked, his tone conversational. Cara explained that this wasn't her house and that she was simply visiting a friend. The man nodded, but his questioning continued. "What about her mom? Is she here?" he pressed. Cara shook her head and replied, "No, she isn't." The man shifted slightly, holding up the brochures. "I'll just leave these with you," he said, stepping closer. Cara couldn't help but notice how careful and deliberate his movements were, how measured his tone felt. His casual demeanor didn't match how he quickly closed the space between them. Still, she stayed put, not wanting to seem rude. Something was off, and it only felt worse as he drew closer. In one quick movement, he clutched the brochures in one hand and reached toward his waistband with the other. In an instant, before she could do anything to react, cold metal pressed against her neck. It was a gun. Time seemed to stand still as Cara struggled to piece together what was happening. Then, with no emotion on his face, the man spoke up. "Don't scream." His tone was firm, leaving no room to argue. Cara's hands shook as she listened, knowing that one wrong move would worsen things. Before she knew it, the man had her walking toward his car, where a large storage bin in the back seat awaited her. It was an ordinary object that would have gone unnoticed on any suburban street. But now it symbolized much more, something sinister. The man asked Cara to get in, the gun never leaving her side. Cara hesitated momentarily, her mind racing, finding a way to escape. But the reality of the weapon pressed against her skin left her no choice. She put herself into the bin. Huddled tightly together, she curled her body into this small, congested area. The kidnapper then tightly closed the lid, and then the car moved. The world outside faded into muffled sounds as the car began to move. Inside the bin, Cara was enveloped in darkness, the air thick with the smell of plastic. Her sense of time and place disoriented, she clung to a single thought: survival. Even as terror ran through her veins, Cara's mind refused to shut down. Instead, she began to analyze her surroundings. She noted the texture of the container, memorized its shape, and focused on the sensations around her. Her heart pounded as she thought of Heather inside the house, unaware of what had just happened. What would her friend think when she found the yard empty? Would she call for help? She prayed silently, hoping for an opportunity to escape. As the car continued to move, Kara's sense of time stretched and warped. She could not know how far they had gone or where they were headed. But even in the face of unimaginable fear, she clung to one unshakable determination. She would survive this. The ordinary day that had started with sunshine and flowers had turned into a nightmare, but Kara refused to let it end there. The air inside the car was thick and suffocating. It carried the faint smell of Marlboro Reds and the hum of classic rock playing softly on the radio. For most, the oppressive silence might have been unbearable, but for 15-year-old Kara Robinson, it was a moment to think, observe, and prepare. Trapped in a dark plastic container, Kara's heart raced with fear but refused to let panic take over. Her focus remained sharp as she absorbed every detail around her. This was not just fear. It was a battle of survival. Even in the container, Kara stayed alert. She felt the texture of the rigid plastic walls pressing against her, noted the rhythm of the car engine, and counted the turns and stops the vehicle made. One detail stood out sharply, the serial number printed inside the box. Over and over, she repeated it in her mind. Kara didn't know if she would survive this ordeal, but instinctively knew these small details could make all the difference. After 10 to 15 minutes, the car stopped. The lid of the container opened. Kara was greeted by her captor again. He spoke in an emotionless voice. "I'm going to tie you up and gag you." Kara made a crucial decision in that moment. She would not fight, at least not yet. Instead, she chose to comply, understanding that resistance could make things worse. She allowed him to bind her hands and feet and gag her mouth, all the while taking mental notes. It was clear to her this wasn't his first time. Even as she lay bound and gagged, Kara's mind remained active. Her compliance was a calculated move to buy time and gather information. The car moved again, and Kara lay silently in the plastic container. She focused intently, trying to make sense of her surroundings through sound. She noted every stop, turn, and pause. Eventually, the car stopped. Her captor warned her to stay quiet before stepping out. Kara listened carefully to the sounds outside, crunching footsteps and faint rustling that hinted they might be in a secluded area. She tried to piece together where she might be, but could only guess. Moments later, the container moved. At first, it felt like it was being lifted, but soon it scraped against the concrete. Kara's anxiety grew as she felt herself being dragged across a rough surface. Finally, she heard a door open and close, signaling she had been brought to a new location. Finally, the lid was opened, and Kara saw she was in her captor's apartment. The place looked ordinary, making it even more disturbing. Such a standard space hiding something terrible. Her captor's voice cut through her thoughts. With absolute authority, he spoke to Kara. "I'm going to take the gag out and remove the restraints, but remember, I'm the one with the gun. You can't scream. Don't try to escape." Kara nodded, appearing calm and compliant, while her mind raced. She didn't know where she was. Once unrestrained, Kara immediately began observing her surroundings with a sharp eye for detail. The apartment, though dimly lit and quiet, provided a bundle of information that she committed to memory with methodical precision. The magnets on the refrigerator caught her attention, featuring the name of a local dentist. A hairbrush tangled with long red hair in the bathroom stood out. Small pets, rodents in cages, occupied the living room. Each detail was logged in her mind, a critical element of her survival strategy. On the kitchen counter, she noted a pile of mail, scanning for names and addresses that might later help identify the man who held her captive. The serial number on the Rubbermaid container that had confined her earlier wasn't forgotten. She revisited it in her mind, ensuring it remained fresh and accurate. These weren't idle observations. They were part of a deliberate plan to escape the captivity and help authorities pinpoint his location if she escaped. Despite the fear that hung in the air, Kara sought to engage her captor in conversation, a move to gather even more information. Her approach wasn't born of curiosity, but survival. She asked him about the lizards and fish he kept. To her surprise, he responded, sharing bits of his life with a politeness that masked the danger he posed. The man talked about his past in the Navy, casually mentioning that he had been discharged. Though seemingly insignificant, these details were gold to Kara, who stored them away with the same determination she had applied to everything else she observed. At one point, he picked up a pencil and began asking Kara deeply personal questions. Where do you live? Do you have a boyfriend? Whose house were you at when I took you? Kara answered carefully, using neutral, composed responses to avoid triggering his anger. As he meticulously wrote down her answers, she noted his methodical approach, the way he seemed to catalogue and control every aspect of the situation. For Kara, every interaction with her captor was a battle of wills. He sought to assert control, asking probing questions and monitoring her every move while she tried to maintain composure and gather the information she needed to survive. The hours stretched on, and the tension in the apartment remained palpable. But Kara's resolve never trembled. By engaging her captor in conversation, Kara kept herself calm and laid the groundwork for her escape. She played a dangerous and harrowing game with unmatched courage and determination. It was not just a physical test, but a relentless psychological battle for Kara. Throughout the troubling hours that followed her abduction, she was aware of the fatal fate that many abducted individuals face. Her captor's every move was calculated, his dominance reinforced by the presence of a knife and gun, always within reach. Over the next several hours, Kara endured repeated assaults, both physical and emotional, that could have broken even the strongest of wills. Yet amidst the overwhelming trauma, Kara resolved to survive. She focused on maintaining her mental resilience, refusing to let the horrifying circumstances crush her spirit. Her captor wielded more than just weapons to maintain control. He employed cruel psychological manipulation. At one point, in an attempt to erode Kara's hope, he suggested they watch the news together. Kara was forced to sit beside him as they watched the broadcast, cynically remarking that her absence hadn't been reported yet. "No one seems to miss you," he said. The reality was that Kara had been missing for less than 8 hours, and it was unlikely her disappearance had even been discovered. But his intention was clear: to isolate her emotionally and convince her of helplessness. As if his comments weren't cruel enough, he manipulated Kara further by implying that even if he did release her, reporting him to the police would carry a high societal cost. "You'll be labeled," he said. He wanted her to feel powerless, even in the hypothetical event of her escape. But Kara saw through his tactics. She understood that his words were designed to break her resolve, and she refused to let them take root. The strain of captivity, both physical and emotional, took a toll on Kara even as she fought to stay strong. Kara was again confined inside the storage container at one particularly low point. The tight, suffocating space compounded her terror. This led to a full-blown panic attack. When the kidnapper returned, he found Kara in distress. To maintain control, and perhaps to prolong her life for his twisted purposes, he promised to leave the container lid slightly open to allow her more air. Any display of resistance could be met with violence, yet her captor's need to keep her alive gave her a slight, fragile advantage. The kidnapper resumed a phone call as Kara lay trapped in the container. He was speaking in a casual tone to his wife, as if nothing had happened. The realization that this man maintained a seemingly ordinary life outside his crimes was both horrifying and surreal. At one point, he casually informed her that his wife was out of town and Kara would stay with him for a few days. He further tightened his grip on her by coercing her into drug use, giving her marijuana and Valium. These substances dulled her senses, a deliberate strategy to weaken her ability to resist or plan an escape. As night fell, the kidnapper prepared for them to sleep. The arrangements were as disturbing as calculated. Using a rope attached to a C-clamp, he secured Kara's handcuffs to the bed frame, forcing her hands to remain above her head. Additionally, he restrained her right leg to the bottom of the bed, ensuring her movements were severely limited. The final act of control was perhaps the most chilling. He lay beside Kara in the bed. The closeness between predator and prey was suffocating. Even as the drugs dulled her senses and the restraints limited her movements, she remained focused on one goal: escaping. Kara's ability to strategize in the face of such adversity was extraordinary. She analyzed every detail of her surroundings, committing the room's layout to memory. She studied the sounds in the apartment, noting the rhythm of his breathing as he fell asleep. These observations became the foundation of her plan to escape. In the early morning hours, Kara found her chance. The kidnapper was asleep beside her, his breathing deep and even. The stillness of the apartment told her that this was her moment. Her hands were restrained above her head. She carefully maneuvered one hand to her mouth and used her teeth to unscrew the C-clamp holding the rope in place. The process was slow, with caution to avoid making noise. Once her hands were free, Kara unfastened the restraint on her right leg. Then she slid out of bed, making no noise. Every creak of the floorboards felt very loud, but Kara pressed on, knowing that hesitation could cost her everything. Kara's escape required not just bravery, but extraordinary patience. She had endured hours of torture and manipulation, and now her resilience was about to be tested like never before. Her chance had finally come, and she was ready to seize it. At that moment, Kara Robinson was no longer just a victim. She was a survivor, ready to reclaim her freedom. Once free from the restraints, Kara slid quietly out of bed and tiptoed toward the living room. The apartment was dimly lit, and early morning shadows stretched across the walls. Kara scanned her surroundings as she moved, mentally mapping her route to the door. Kara's path to freedom was straightforward. The front door was closed, but a metal accordion-style closet door stood next to it. A potential noise trap. The closet contained household items, including a vacuum cleaner and the Rubbermaid container that had been her prison during the abduction. Kara carefully rearranged the objects, anticipating how to minimize noise if she had to move the closet door. She turned her attention to the front door, testing the lock as quietly as possible. The realization struck her that opening the door would likely wake her captor, whose bedroom window overlooked the entrance. The stakes were impossibly high. If he woke, her life was in immediate danger. With a swift, decisive motion, Kara flung the closet door shut and swung through the front door open. The sound shattered the stillness, but Kara didn't look back. She sprinted barefoot across the parking lot. Every second felt like an eternity as she imagined him waking, reaching for the gun, and aiming at her through the window. As Kara ran, her eyes scanned the parking lot for any sign of help. In the distance, she saw a car approaching. She ran towards it without hesitation, waving her arms frantically to get the driver's attention. The car stopped, and Kara rushed to the driver's side. Her voice was trembling with fear. "I was just kidnapped. I just came from that apartment," she said, pointing back toward the building she had escaped. Two people were in the car, a middle-aged man and a younger companion who stared at her in shock. Kara's appearance complemented what she was saying. A young girl, barefoot, disheveled, and with handcuffs still clamped around her wrist. They needed no further explanation. "Please, take me to the police department." The person in the car took her to the police station. She had escaped, but her journey was far from over. They arrived at the Richland County Sheriff's substation, and Kara was ushered inside. She narrated her experience to the deputy on duty. However, the response she received was different from what she had anticipated. Despite the handcuffs dangling from her wrist, a tangible symbol of her ordeal, Kara was met with skepticism. The deputy's reaction seemed disbelieving, as if her incredible story were too far-fetched to be true. Kara's frustration mounted. "I still have handcuffs," she pointed out, her tone tinged with exasperation. "I escaped." She had survived something unimaginable, found the courage to escape, and asked for help, only to feel dismissed by those she trusted to protect her. "I did what I needed to do. I escaped," Kara later said. "But now, in a place where I should feel safe, I'm being treated like I'm lying." It took time and effort, but Kara finally convinced the authorities of her identity and story. Once they believed her, the seriousness of her situation became clear. The deputy quickly called Kara's mother to share that her daughter had been found. The phone call was emotional. Kara could hear her mother's voice, filled with disbelief and relief. "Kara, you have Kara," her mother said repeatedly, as if saying it would make it feel real. For Kara, the call was a powerful reminder of all she had endured and everything she had fought to return to. Before taking Kara Robinson to the hospital for a medical evaluation, deputies acted swiftly on the detailed recollections she provided. Her remarkable memory became the cornerstone of their investigation. Despite the terror she endured, Kara memorized critical details during her captivity. Names on mail, magnets on the refrigerator, and even the serial number inside the storage container. Guiding investigators to the apartment complex where she had been held, Kara faced the challenge of identifying the exact unit. The sheer volume of information she had stored in her mind was overwhelming, but her descriptions proved invaluable. Deputies enlisted the help of the property manager, who, riding alongside them on a golf cart, quickly identified the specific apartment based on Kara's detailed account. This pivotal breakthrough marked a significant step forward in the investigation. But when the deputies arrived, they were met with a major setback. The suspect had already fled. Realizing Kara had escaped, he must have understood the seriousness of his situation. The apartment was empty, but what he left behind was invaluable. Inside, investigators found several items that confirmed Kara's story and provided crucial evidence. The Rubbermaid container she had been held in was still there, along with the rope and restraints used to tie her up. Documents with the suspect's name were scattered around, making it easier to identify him. Kara's kidnapper was identified as Richard Mark Evanitz. When authorities learned about the kidnapper's identity, they launched a nationwide manhunt, distributing his photograph and vehicle details. Investigators meticulously pieced together his movements through public records, employment history, and personal relationships, uncovering a predator who had successfully hidden his violent tendencies for years. It was a revelation for law enforcement. Evanitz had not been on their radar, nor had he previously attracted suspicion. The fact that he had evaded detection for so long underscored the importance of Kara's escape and the meticulous details she provided. As Kara's information unraveled the secrets of her captivity, her abductor, Richard Mark Evanitz, fled South Carolina. His escape route took him through Georgia and into Florida, but law enforcement was closing in. Sensing the inevitability of capture, Evanitz began making cryptic phone calls to his family. During these calls, he confessed to more crimes than he could remember and admitted to killing someone. However, he offered no specific details about his victims, leaving his relatives stunned and investigators sure of a far darker history. Sheriff Leon Lott, who led the investigation in South Carolina, summarized the situation. He was somebody who felt everything closing in on him. The secret was out, the monster exposed. Evanitz fled to Florida, where a high-speed chase ended with him cornered. Rather than face justice, he ended his life with a self-inflicted gunshot. While his death marked the end of his reign of terror, it also left unanswered questions about the full extent of his crimes. Richard Evanitz's double life began to unravel in 2002, following the escape of Kara Robinson Chamberlain. Her courage and meticulous recollection of details led investigators directly to his door. Inside his apartment, authorities found evidence tying him to the Lisk Silver murders and other crimes, including a list of potential future victims. A man who outwardly appeared respectable, he harbored a capacity for unspeakable violence. His ability to evade detection for years highlights systemic challenges in identifying and apprehending serial predators. For the families of his victims, the scars of his actions endure, but the bravery of survivors like Kara Robinson ensures that his crimes will never be forgotten. Despite his facade of normalcy, Evanitz's crimes revealed the depths of his pervertedness. His ability to live a seemingly respectable life while committing such horrifying acts remains a sobering reminder of how deeply predators can blend into society. Evanitz's documented criminal behavior began in 1987, though it's likely his deviant tendencies existed long before. On January 3, 1987, he approached 15-year-old Kelly Ballard in Jacksonville, Florida, engaging in inappropriate behavior from his car while she was walking her 3-year-old sister. The following day, he escalated his actions, stalking Kelly and her mother in a mall parking lot. Recognizing the danger, Kelly's mother reported his license plate to the police. A month later, he was arrested when Evanitz's ship returned to port. He entered a no-contest plea and received a 3-year probation sentence. During his interviews with investigators, Evanitz admitted to struggling with inappropriate public behavior, hinting at deeper issues that went largely unaddressed. In 1988, the small town of Bowdoin, Maine, was rocked by the brutal murder of 12-year-old Sarah Margaret Cherry. Sarah, who had been babysitting at a rural home, was abducted, assaulted, and killed. Her body was discovered days later in a wooded area, bound with rope and bearing signs of severe trauma. Though Dennis Duchesne was convicted of the crime, his repeated claims of innocence and the circumstantial nature of the evidence left room for doubt. Evans, stationed aboard the USS Kulch in nearby Portland, Maine, became a figure of interest years later. His access to a white Toyota Corolla, a vehicle seen near the crime scene, and his frequent visits to a nearby commissary fueled suspicions. However, attempts to link through DNA evidence were inconclusive. While Duchesne remains incarcerated, advocates continue to explore the possibility that Evans may have been involved in Sarah Cherry's murder. The Route 29 corridor in Virginia became a notorious hotspot for disappearances and murders in the 1990s, and several of these cases have been linked to Evans's predatory behavior. Alicia Showalter Reynolds. On March 2, 1996, 25-year-old Alicia disappeared along Route 29 while traveling from Baltimore to Charlottesville. Her abandoned car was found that evening, and her body was discovered 2 months later in a wooded area. Witnesses reported seeing her with a man near a blue pickup truck. Anne Carolyn McDaniel. Later that year, on September 18, 1996, 20-year-old Anne, who had cerebral palsy, vanished while hitchhiking along the same route. Her burned remains were discovered 4 days later, just 10 miles from where Alicia's body had been found. Investigators later linked Evans to these crimes through evidence recovered from his possession. In Spotsylvania County, Virginia, Evans's crimes escalated in brutality and premeditation. In September 1996, 16-year-old Sophia Silva was abducted from her front steps. Her body, altered post-mortem, was found in a creek weeks later. These crimes terrorized the community, but Evans remained undetected, his outward normalcy shielding him from suspicion. On May 1, 1997, sisters Kristin and Kathy Lisk were abducted from their home after school. Their bodies were discovered in the South Anna River 5 days later, showing signs of assault and strangulation. Inside Richard Evans's Columbia apartment, investigators uncovered evidence that connected him to the brutal murders of 3 young girls in Spotsylvania County, Virginia: Sophia Silva, 16, and sisters Kristin Lisk, 15, and Kathy Lisk, 12. The items were handwritten notes detailing their physical descriptions, ages, and movements. A map in his possession led directly to Blockhouse Road, where the Lisk sisters had lived. Investigators also discovered a Fredericksburg newspaper from the day after the Lisk sisters' abductions, further tying Evans to the crimes. Forensic evidence sealed his guilt. Blue fibers from a pair of furry handcuffs in his apartment matched fibers found on the victims. The most damning discovery came from his car. Kristin Lisk's palm print and fingerprints were found inside the trunk. A remarkable find considering the murders had occurred 5 years earlier. Experts called it a miraculous piece of forensic work. Evans's notes revealed a deeply methodical predator. His records detailed young girls' ages, appearances, and locations, painting a chilling picture of calculated stalking and abduction. Over the years, law enforcement began to suspect Evans's involvement in other unsolved crimes, including an abduction in 1994 and an assault in 1995 in Spotsylvania, Virginia. While no definitive evidence tied him to these incidents at the time, they followed a pattern that would later become disturbingly clear. Evans lived a life that appeared ordinary to those around him. Friends and neighbors described him as polite and unassuming, blending seamlessly into his community. During his 8 years in the Navy, he was awarded the Good Conduct Medal twice and earned respect from co-workers in his civilian jobs. Yet beneath this respectable exterior lay a deeply disturbed individual. In 1988, he was convicted of exposing himself to a teenager and her toddler sister in Florida, a red flag that foreshadowed his escalating predatory behavior. Over the years, he relocated frequently, a pattern investigators later saw as an effort to stay anonymous and avoid detection. Richard Mark Evans's life was one shaped by dysfunction, early trauma, and a series of events that culminated in one of the most chilling crime sprees in modern history. Born on July 29, 1963, in Columbia, South Carolina, Evans was the eldest of 3 siblings in a household marred by instability and abuse. His father, Joseph Evans, was an alcoholic known for his volatile temper and violent behavior. On one occasion, Joseph drowned the family dog in front of young Richard, an event that traumatized him deeply. Even more disturbingly, Joseph attempted to drown Richard himself when he was just 6 years old. These early experiences left indelible scars on a boy who struggled to find a sense of stability in his formative years. Richard's mother, Tess, tried to keep the family together, but her husband's behavior often overshadowed her efforts. The couple separated multiple times before divorcing in 1985 when Richard was in his early 20s. By then, Richard had already developed a complex relationship with authority and control that would later manifest in the worst ways. Despite his troubled upbringing, Evans outwardly appeared to follow a conventional path. After graduating from Irmo High School in 1980, he worked briefly as a manager at Jiffy Lube before enlisting in the United States Navy. His time in the Navy was marked by competence and discipline. He served as a sonar technician, earning a Good Conduct Medal for his service. Evans's naval career lasted 8 years before he was honorably discharged, a decision that, at the time, seemed unremarkable, but later took on sinister implications. Post-Navy, Evans attempted to build a stable civilian life. He worked in sales for companies specializing in compressors and grinding equipment, moving between jobs as financial pressures mounted. His outward appearance as a hard-working veteran belied the dark impulses brewing beneath the surface. By 1997, struggles escalated, forcing him to declare bankruptcy. In 1999, his home was foreclosed following a failed business venture, further destabilizing his life. At the time of his death, Evans was employed at an air compressor company and had returned to South Carolina. To those who knew him casually, he seemed like a man trying to rebuild, though with several personal setbacks. But beneath this facade of normalcy lay a dark and violent nature, shaped by unresolved trauma and a distraught mind. The shadow cast by Richard Mark Evans extended far beyond the crimes he was known to have committed. Years after his death, his actions would resurface, influencing other cases and revealing the devastating ripple effects of his heinous behavior. One such case involved the decades-old murder of Justin Lee Turner, a 5-year-old boy whose tragic death led to accusations against his parents. In 1989, Justin Lee Turner was found murdered, and suspicion quickly fell on his stepmother and father. Despite the lack of concrete evidence, prosecutors pursued the couple for years, bringing charges against them multiple times. Although the evidence was insufficient to convict, the Turners lived under suspicion for decades. In 2024, Deirdre Enright, a law professor and former director of the Innocence Project at the University of Virginia, stepped in. Enright, who had been researching Evans for a book, had compiled an extensive database of his movements and modus operandi. Her findings suggested that Evans could have been in the area at the time of Justin Turner's death. In a pivotal moment, Enright made a Friday night phone call to the Turners' lawyer, Sean, sharing her findings. "This will be the weirdest message you've received in a long time," Enright told Kent, explaining how Evans's timeline and patterns aligned with the case. She also referenced his chilling final words, "I committed more crimes than I can remember." Enright detailed Evans's tendencies to stalk school buses, abduct children, and sexually assault his victims, patterns that mirrored the circumstances of Justin's murder. Enright's findings revealed that in 2008, the FBI had issued a nationwide alert urging state law enforcement agencies to review unsolved abductions, assaults, and murders during periods when Evans was known to be in their jurisdictions. Despite this alert, local authorities failed to act. Enright's meticulous research and the FBI's earlier warnings cast a new light on Justin Turner's case. When Kent introduced Enright's findings in court, they caused an uproar. Prosecutors requested time to investigate further, delaying a decision. Ultimately, however, the evidence proved instrumental in clearing the Turners of all charges. On June 7th, a judge dismissed the charges against them with prejudice, ensuring they could not be charged again for the same crime. The Turners, though exonerated, have been deeply scarred by the years of suspicion. Victor Lee Turner described the stigma he endured, which prevented him from mourning his son openly. While relieved that the ordeal was over, Victor expressed the enduring pain of his loss. "My son was my life. It is over in a way, but not over. Every time I think about it, I still get choked up." For Enright, the resolution of the Turner case was bittersweet. "I'm just so glad this happened to give you time to be free of it," she said in a conversation with the family. Richard Evanitz's crimes not only devastated the lives of his direct victims and their families, but also left a broader legacy of harm. His actions contributed to wrongful accusations and prolonged suffering for people like the Turners, whose lives were upended by systemic failures in the justice system. The resolution of the Turner case underscores the importance of meticulous investigation and the tireless pursuit of truth. Enright's research illuminated the need for law enforcement to revisit past cases and confront the possibility that many of Evanitz's crimes remain undiscovered. In doing so, she not only cleared the names of the innocent, but also honored the memory of victims whose voices might have otherwise been lost to time. Cara Robinson married Joseph Chamberlain in April 2011 in St. Lucia, surrounded by friends and family. Their union began a life filled with love, resilience, and shared purpose. Cara, a survivor of a harrowing abduction, and Joseph, a dedicated police officer, built a relationship deeply rooted in understanding, support, and mutual aspirations. Cara and Joseph first met through their involvement in law enforcement. After Cara transformed her traumatic experience into a mission to serve and protect others, she encountered Joseph, whose commitment to public safety resonated with her. Their shared values and dedication to justice created a strong and enduring connection. Joseph has been a pillar of strength for Cara, providing emotional support as she worked through her recovery and embraced her new role as an advocate and public speaker. Their mutual understanding of the challenges and responsibilities inherent in their professions brought them together and helped them form a partnership based on trust and mutual respect. Cara's extraordinary journey from trauma to triumph has shaped her relationship with Joseph in profound ways. An unshakable foundation of love and support characterizes their bond. Together, they share a mission to inspire, educate, and protect others. Their partnership is a testament to the power of resilience and mutual empowerment. Joseph's acceptance of Cara's past has helped solidify their relationship. His embrace of her story and mission highlights the depth of their connection. After their wedding, Cara and Joseph began living together in South Carolina, later expanding their family with the birth of their two sons, Colton and Carter. Their approach to family life is both unconventional and inspiring. The Chamberlains have embraced an adventurous lifestyle by living in an RV. This decision reflects their desire to prioritize exploration, education, and shared experiences. By homeschooling their children, they ensure Colton and Carter receive a personalized education enriched by their travels. Life on the road fosters closeness and creates lasting memories for the family. Their travels expose their children to various cultures, environments, and histories, broadening their understanding of the world. Joseph's career as a seasoned police officer complements Cara's advocacy work. His dedication to public safety aligns with their shared values, and his strength of character has been a cornerstone of their relationship. Joseph's law enforcement career, combined with Cara's income as a public speaker and content creator, provides the Chamberlains with financial stability. Their combined net worth, estimated at $1 million to $1.5 million, allows them to pursue their unconventional lifestyle while ensuring a secure future for their family. Cara's survivor and public speaker work continues to touch lives, with Joseph standing by her as an unwavering partner. Their decision to live on the road underscores their commitment to prioritizing family, exploration, and growth. The Chamberlains have built a life that reflects their values, inspiring others to embrace resilience, love, and a sense of purpose. Their story reminds them that love, coupled with shared dreams and mutual support, can lead to an extraordinary life filled with meaning and adventure. In the years following her escape, Cara pursued a career that mirrored her commitment to justice and victim advocacy. During college, she worked in victim services and at a DNA lab at the Richland County Sheriff's Department. She gained first-hand experience in supporting survivors and uncovering critical evidence in criminal cases. Her time in these roles provided her with a deeper understanding of the justice system and how it intersects with the needs of victims. Determined to make an even greater impact, Cara enrolled in the police academy. She graduated as the only woman in her class, a distinction that underscored both her perseverance and her commitment to challenging traditional barriers. Kara went on to specialize in investigating sex abuse cases, a role that required not only technical expertise, but also immense empathy and sensitivity. Her work brought justice to survivors and gave her a platform to advocate for systemic changes within law enforcement. Even as she shifted her focus to her family, Kara remained deeply committed to her advocacy work. She transitioned into the role of a motivational speaker, using her story to inspire and educate others. Whether addressing law enforcement professionals, victim advocates, or survivors themselves, Kara's message is clear. Recovery is possible, and no one has to face it alone. Kara has embraced the power of social media to amplify her message, particularly on platforms like TikTok, where her influence has grown significantly. With over 800,000 followers, Kara uses her platform to provide safety tips, advice on processing trauma, and guidance on supporting survivors. Her content is not only informative, but also deeply personal, as she draws on her own experiences to connect with her audience. Through her videos, Kara has been able to reach people who might otherwise feel isolated or unheard. Her approachable and authentic style has made her a trusted voice in the survivor community, and her impact continues to grow with each post. By sharing practical strategies for navigating trauma and building resilience, she empowers others to take control of their own healing journeys. In one of her Instagram posts, she shared a profound message about personal responsibility in healing and growth. What happened was not your fault, but healing is your responsibility. She continued with a thought-provoking perspective. No one is coming to save you. This sounds controversial, but I find it empowering. Let me explain. Kara's words reflect a philosophy of reclaiming power and control in the face of adversity. She emphasizes the importance of personal agency in three key areas: safety, healing, and emotional responses. Kara advises against outsourcing safety, urging individuals to take proactive control over their well-being. As she explained, your brain is the weapon. Learn to use it. This advice encourages survivors to embrace their strength and resourcefulness as tools for self-protection. The story shared by Kara Robinson Chamberlain on her YouTube video, titled My Story, was posted on the 22nd anniversary of her kidnapping in 2002. This milestone marks over 2 decades since the traumatic event that changed her life, but also set her on a path to resilience, advocacy, and empowerment. Even 22 years later, as Kara Robinson Chamberlain recounted her kidnapping, she vividly remembers,
2002, I had spent the night with my best friend. We were always together, and we were trying to decide what to do for the day. We wanted to go to the lake, and so we called our friend who lived on the lake. We decided that that's what we were going to do for the day, but my friend wanted to take a shower first. So she had called her mom and asked if there was anything that we needed to do before we left the house for the day, and our mom asked that we water the plants. I wanted to take a shower. I volunteered to go out and water the plants for her. That was a decision that forever changed my life. I in my pajama shorts and my t-shirt and started watering the plants. And I noticed a car driving by on the way out of the neighborhood. I noticed the car because I was 15, I was getting ready to get my license, and I was paying attention to cars, trying to decide what kind of car I wanted to drive. So when the car came back into the neighborhood and pulled directly into the driveway, I took note of it. I remembered it because I had just seen it and I had actually paid attention to it, which wasn't always the case.
every detail of the harrowing incident. When asked about her ability to move forward after such a traumatic experience, Kara shares a powerful perspective.
In a neighborhood, so there's houses all around, it's broad daylight. I felt safe. In the driveway, a man got out, average looking white male. I estimated he was in his 30s. He was about 5'10", like average height, maybe a little heavier than average, but he didn't look like anyone who set off any alarms for me. He had a binder in his arms and he said, "Hey, I saw you out here. I'm distributing these magazines, these pamphlets, and I would love to leave them for your mom or dad if they're home." And I said, "Well, this is my friend's house." And he said, "Okay, well, what about her parents? Are they home?" And I said, "No, her mom's not home right now." During this whole interchange, he maintained a respectable distance from me. There's no red flags going off at any point during this conversation. It was when he stepped in to hand me the magazines that things changed. I immediately felt what I somehow knew to be a weapon pressed to my neck. It was a small caliber handgun, and he pressed it in and he said, "Come with me." When I felt that weapon press into my neck, I immediately went into fight or flight. If you've never experienced this, it's automatic and you don't have a lot of control over it. So when he said, "Come with me," I went, "Stop." And he said, "No, you're gonna come with me." He had his right arm around my neck. And so because the handgun was so small, it could not be seen by an outside observer. I walked with him to his car. I walked to the driver's side, and he opened the driver's side door, put the seat forward, and told me to get into the back seat. When I looked into the back seat, all I saw was the seat was filled with a plastic container. I said, "Where do I go?" He said, "Get in the container." So I did. I got in the container. He loosely put the lid on. He put his seat back, got in the car, shut the door, and drove away.
Trauma is not something you get over, but something you get through. This message encapsulates her belief that while traumatic events leave a lasting impact, they do not define who we are. Instead, they can serve as catalysts for growth, strength, and a deeper understanding of our own capabilities. Kara's philosophy resonates with survivors around the world. Her ability to speak candidly about the challenges of recovery, while also highlighting the triumphs, has made her a source of hope for countless individuals. She is a living example of how survivors can reclaim their narratives and use their voices to advocate for change. Kara's work extends far beyond her personal story. By educating law enforcement, victim advocates, and the public, she has contributed to a broader understanding of the complexities of trauma and recovery. Her insights help professionals better support survivors, while her outreach efforts empower individuals to prioritize safety and self-care. In 2010, Kara Robinson Chamberlain addressed graduates at the local police academy in Fredericksburg, sharing her insights and inspiring them with her story of resilience and strength. Through her advocacy, Kara has also helped shift the narrative around trauma. She emphasizes that recovery is not linear.
Thank you. First, I want to say hello, good afternoon, Academy graduates, and friends and family. I want to extend to each of you graduates a sincere congratulations. You each deserve to be sitting where you are today. I was in your shoes just a few months ago, so I know where you are right now. All of your hard work and dedication has now come to fruition, and it's now worth it. And in front of you is a tabula rasa, a blank slate, to do with what you desire. That being said, I would like to offer you a few words of wisdom that I have learned from my own life and experiences. Never give up, treat others with respect and kindness, and do what you love. When I was 15 years old, I was your average 15-year-old girl, but going on 30. But something happened to me in my 15th year that would forever change my life and my future. On June 24th, 2002, I was kidnapped, sexually assaulted, and held for 18 hours by Richard Mark Ivanitz. If this name sounds familiar, that's because this is the man that was eventually tied to the deaths of 3 girls who together formed one of Virginia's most notorious unsolved cases. Ivanitz held me, and as I now realize, planned on taking my life. And yet, here I stand before each and every one of you today. Let me tell you how that happened. I fought. The entire 18 hours, I knew I would survive.
And that every survivor's journey is unique. This approach fosters compassion and understanding, encouraging communities to rally around those who need support. Kara Robinson's bravery did more than save her own life. It brought a serial predator to justice. Her escape and the detailed account she provided led law enforcement to Ivanitz, exposing him for who he truly was. The revelations that followed not only solved cold cases, but also brought a sense of relief to communities haunted by his crimes for years. Kara Robinson Chamberlain's summer day took an unimaginable turn, showcasing the resilience of the human spirit in the face of danger. But not all crimes are committed by evil serial killers, because in our next story, we dive into a case of betrayal closer to home. A chilling courtroom moment that left everyone stunned as a 6-year-old boy pointed a finger at the person accused of killing his sister. Click on the next video to find out how Adriana Hutto's killer turned out to be someone she trusted with her life. Click on the link to uncover the details behind a son's chilling words, "My mum did it." Cara Robinson's bravery and quick thinking saved her life, but our next case takes a much darker turn. It's the tragic story of the Harrison family, whose lives were taken over a bitter custody dispute. This case shows how even the most trusted individuals can hide their darkest intentions.
How did you kill Bridget?
The housekeeper had been cleaning for 2 hours, unaware that there was a crime scene upstairs. Her routine was interrupted when a man came looking for Caleb Harrison, the homeowner who had yet to show up at work that day. She hadn't seen Caleb and noted that his bedroom door was closed. Together, they went upstairs and found him motionless in bed. The blanket pulled up to his chin, making it look like he was sleeping peacefully. As the ambulance sirens filled the air, the vehicle stopped in front of the grandest house on a tree-lined street in suburban Mississauga. It was just past noon on August 23, 2013. Paramedic Patrick Morin felt a strange familiarity as he looked at the house with its sloped roof and big windows. Turning to his partner, he said, "I've been here before." The paramedics rushed to the master bedroom on the second floor, but it was too late. Caleb Harrison was already gone. Caleb was a 40-year-old dad of 2 who always wore a welcoming smile. Despite some tough times in his past, he had the names of his children tattooed over his heart, a sign of deep love. The night before, under the fading light of a late August sunset, he had been coaching his daughter's softball game in nearby Etobicoke. He drove home alone afterwards since his kids, ages 10 and 12, were spending the week with their mother, his ex-wife. The whole family, including Caleb's ex and her new husband, had been together at the game. Back at home, Caleb relaxed with a drink and some TV. Around 11 p.m., after a call to his girlfriend, he turned his phone to silent and settled in for the night. Being a light sleeper, he wore an eye mask and kept a loud fan running in his bedroom to drown out any noise. Now, paramedics and police stood over Caleb's body, noticing signs of a struggle, bruises and scratches on his neck, swollen knuckles, and deep scratches across his chest. Constable Sonia Mackin, tasked with photographing the crime scene, walked in through the front door and was immediately struck by a sense of déjà vu as she saw the carpeted staircase leading upstairs. She had been here years ago, taking photos of another body at the bottom of these very stairs. Outside, the presence of police cruisers and the fluttering police tape spurred a flurry of phone calls among the community. A neighbor called a family friend, who then called another friend, eventually reaching Elizabeth Gallant, Caleb's aunt, who lived close by. Shaken by the grim rumor she just heard, Gallant couldn't believe it. Overwhelmed and needing answers, she got into her car and drove straight to the Harrison home. Caleb was not the first in his family to die in this house, nor was he the second. Back in April 2010, his mother, 63-year-old Bridget Harrison, was found dead at the bottom of the stairs leading to the room. Just a year before, in the same place, Bill Harrison was found dead at 64.
She did the whole thing of, "Are you sitting down? What are you doing? Are you sitting down?" And I said, "No." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Something happened to Bill." Kind of don't think I believed anything until I saw the ambulance on the street and the fire department and the police not being able to do CPR, and her whole coming home, arrival, and it was dark, and she couldn't find him at first, and then she found him in the locked bathroom.
His death was thought to be natural until Bridget died in suspicious circumstances, leading the coroner to label both their deaths as undetermined. Now, a third mysterious death had occurred. An entire family had been wiped out in the same house. How could this happen? The Harrison family had lived at 3635 Pitch Pine Crescent for nearly 40 years, making it the central gathering spot for family and friends. Caleb's parents, Bill and Bridget Harrison, purchased the home back in 1975, over 10 years after they first fell in love backstage at the Stratford Festival. This house had become more than just a residence. It was a hub of activity, a place where siblings, aunts, uncles, cousins, and friends often came together. Bridget was a standout student and a star in local theatre productions. Her passion for the arts led her to a pivotal apprenticeship at Stratford's internationally renowned performing arts theatre at just 16, where she met William Harrison. Bill was a tall, handsome man who was 2 years her senior and worked in the costume department. He was instantly taken with the petite blonde apprentice. Growing up in Stratford, Bill was immersed in a creative environment. His household was filled with musicians and jazz lovers. His father managed Harrison's beauty parlor, a business his great-grandparents had started after escaping slavery in Virginia and journeying to Canada via the Underground Railroad in 1837. In the 1960s, Bill, a black man, and Bridget, a white woman, faced both subtle and overt racism as they dated. Despite these challenges, they remained deeply committed to each other, marrying in 1969 and settling in Mississauga. Bill built a career in sales and management, while Bridget embarked on a distinguished path in education. She worked as a teacher, principal, superintendent, and eventually as a special assistant to the education minister. Bridget became a pioneer in her field, mentoring countless students and educators throughout her career. Her impact was so profound that more than 1,000 people attended her funeral, with half of those present raising their hands when asked if she had influenced their careers. Together, Bridget and Bill were a formidable duo, her vibrant passion perfectly complemented by his calm, steady demeanor. They were known for their warmth and generosity, becoming a beloved fixture in their community. Family members often joked that they could have charged consulting fees for the invaluable advice they provided on education, careers, and relationships. Unable to conceive naturally, Bridget and Bill chose the path of adoption. In 1973, they welcomed Caleb, a delightful 6-month-old baby with chubby cheeks, into their lives. From early on, Caleb was a bundle of energy, always getting into mischief. He was a little rascal, his aunt Elizabeth Gallant recalled with a laugh. Caleb faced challenges in school, particularly being teased for his Tourette syndrome. As her son to attend school and do well, her brother noted. While Bridget and Caleb deeply loved each other, their strong personalities sometimes clashed. Bill, ever the peacekeeper with his calm demeanor, often acted as the mediator between them, smoothing over tensions and maintaining harmony within the family. 9 years before,
Caleb could push Bridget's buttons, but he could never push Bill's buttons. And so Bill would be the buffer. Bill would be the guy who would, calm Caleb down and calm Bridget down.
The unsettling series of deaths at Pitchpine Crescent began, Caleb Harrison's life took a romantic turn when he met his future wife at a doll warehouse. At 27, Caleb was known for his wit and was a delight to be around. He had jumped straight into the workforce after high school, where his methodical, meticulous nature and love for routine led him to thrive in the shipping and receiving industry, just as e-commerce was beginning to boom. In 2000, while working in the shipping department, Caleb found himself captivated by a young woman working at the front desk. Melissa Merritt, 19 at the time, was a quintessential girl next door with her animal-loving nature, blushing skin, and highlighted hair. She came from a law enforcement family. Her father was a Toronto police officer, and her brother was set to continue the tradition. As she ended an engagement with her high school boyfriend, who wasn't ready for marriage, Melissa turned her attention to Caleb. She longed for stability. She dreamed of having a home, a husband, and most importantly, children. Within months of their relationship starting, Caleb excitedly shared with his parents that he and Merritt were planning to start a family soon. Merritt had lost an ovary due to a medical condition, and there was a chance she might need to remove the other, making their window to naturally conceive potentially limited. As someone who was adopted and had faced lingering questions about his own biological origins, Caleb was particularly keen on beginning his family. Within just 3.5 years, the couple had married, had 2 children, and bought a house in Georgetown, a 30-minute drive from their families in Mississauga. However, their relationship began to suffer under financial pressures, the weight of family responsibilities, and Caleb's drinking issues. The couple's domestic situation escalated further when, in June 2005, Merritt called the police to report that Caleb had assaulted her at their home. Caleb was arrested, charged, and eventually convicted of domestic assault. The fallout from their tumultuous relationship was severe. Caleb ended up moving back in with his parents, while Merritt stayed in the house in Georgetown and refused to let Caleb see their children. Not long after, Caleb's life spiraled further out of control. 1 month later, he drove home drunk from a party in Milton and was involved in a tragic accident where he collided head-on with a taxi, resulting in the death of the driver and injuries to 4 young passengers. Bridget and Bill were heartbroken by the incident. Caleb faced serious charges of drunk driving causing death. Despite his own severe injuries from the crash, he was released on bail under the condition that he reside with his parents. Amidst his recovery, another incident occurred involving Merritt. She reported a home invasion to the Halton police, claiming she had been attacked in her own backyard. The police subsequently approached Caleb at his parents' home as a potential suspect. However, as Caleb had been seriously injured in the crash, was unable to walk without crutches, and therefore could not possibly have been involved in the alleged home invasion. During this turbulent period, Merritt reported several more home invasions, but these incidents led to no charges being filed. Despite the serious nature of the allegations, Merritt was never charged. In a pivotal court decision in October 2005, a judge ruled in favor of Caleb having access to his children. He was granted visitation rights on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and every other weekend, under the condition that he continue to comply with his bail terms, which included residing with his parents. This arrangement was intended to ensure some stability for the children and allow Caleb to maintain a presence in their lives while adhering to the legal constraints set upon him. That winter, Merritt's life took a new turn when she met 28-year-old Christopher Fattore online. Standing at 6'4" and built like a linebacker, Fattore was a notable presence. He grew up in an Italian neighborhood in North Toronto, where he completed high school before taking on various jobs. His career path was eclectic. He managed the kitchen at a Hooters, worked as a nightclub bouncer, and also took on jobs as a handyman. In October 2006, Fattore took a significant step by proposing to Merritt on his birthday. As their wedding approached in the spring, they encountered a major complication. Merritt was still legally married to Caleb. Despite this, they proceeded with a ceremonial event. Over the next 5 years, Merritt and Fattore expanded their family, having 4 children together, bringing Merritt's total to 6 children. Merritt admitted to being sporadically employed and horrible at managing money, which often led them to rely on social assistance and financial help from family members to get by. As Merritt embarked on her second marriage, the custody arrangement for her children with Caleb changed significantly. A judge ruled that Caleb would have 50-50 custody, meaning his children would now split their time equally between living at Pitch Pine Crescent with their father and his parents, and with their mother and her new husband in their house in Mississauga. Bill and Bridget, embracing their roles as grandparents, became deeply involved in their grandchildren's lives. They actively participated in driving the kids to school, taking them to various activities, and assisting with homework. However, Merritt was not pleased with their involvement. She expressed her discontent in an email to the Harrisons, stating, "If Caleb is not caring for the children, no one other than myself should be." Over the next 2 years, the situation between Merritt and the Harrison family grew increasingly contentious. Merritt made 5 separate claims, alleging that Caleb or his parents had assaulted the children. By December 2008, the conflict had escalated to the point where Merritt was preventing the Harrisons from seeing the children at all. In March, Caleb's legal troubles culminated in him beginning an 18-month jail sentence for the drunk driving incident that resulted in a fatality. During his incarceration, the court granted Bridget and Bill the right to fulfill Caleb's share of custody, ensuring the children remained in a stable and familiar environment. Amid financial difficulties and dissatisfaction with the custody agreement, Merritt and Fattore grew increasingly frustrated. In response, they made a drastic decision to leave Mississauga. They planned a sudden move, organizing everything without informing either the Harrisons or their parents of their intentions, aiming to start anew away from the complications and constraints of their current situation. That evening, on April 16, 2009, as Merritt and Fattore made plans to disappear, Bridget Harrison returned home to an unsettling silence. The house was dark as she stepped inside just before 9 p.m. Coming back from a school board meeting, she anticipated seeing her husband at home. Yet, as she entered the foyer, the only sound greeting her was the low hum of the television coming from the living room. A half-eaten takeout meal lay abandoned on the coffee table. "Bill?" she called out, her voice echoing slightly in the quiet house. Bridget received no response. She searched the second floor, but Bill was not in their bedroom. Returning downstairs, she noticed the powder room door was shut. "Bill?" she called again. When there was still no answer, she realized the door was locked. Using a pin, Bridget managed to pick the lock.
Ambulance, what's your emergency?
My husband, I just came home from work and I found him collapsed on the bathroom floor.
What do you need the ambulance in?
I beg your pardon?
What city?
Mississauga.
What's the address?
3635 Pitch Pine Crescent.
Lock and pushed the door open, only to find her husband slumped against the far wall on the...
Okay, is your husband awake?
No, he's not. I can't move him. He's wedged against the wall between the toilet and the door and everything.
Just stay on the line, ma'am.
Yeah, I can't move him. He's not breathing.
Okay.
I can tell. Oh my God.
Bathroom floor. Panicking, she dialed 911 immediately. The 911 operator instructed
He's not breathing.
Bridget to check for any vital signs. Bill was cold and stiff, and Bridget struggled as she attempted to move his body to better assess him. When the paramedics arrived, they quickly confirmed the grim reality that Bridget had already recognized. Bill was dead. The scene was a heartbreaking moment of realization and despair for Bridget as she grappled with the sudden loss of her husband. At the scene, while speaking with the police, Bridget expressed her concerns about several unusual aspects of the situation. She found it peculiar that the bathroom door, which could be locked from either side, was secured. She wondered why Bill, who was home alone, would feel the need to lock the door. Additionally, she noted that it was odd for the house lights to be off, adding another layer of mystery to the circumstances of her discovery. When coroner Dr. Reuven Girard arrived at the Harrison residence, he began his examination of Bill's body and observed notable abrasions on his neck. These were thin red marks across his throat, which he speculated might have been caused by Bill's necklace, as relayed by a police officer who later testified. To ensure a thorough record, Dr. Girard requested that these marks be documented, prompting officers from Peel's Forensic Identification Services unit to take photographs of the abrasions. Despite these peculiar findings, the locked door and the marks on the neck, the investigators did not immediately deem Bill's death suspicious. They categorized it as sudden and unexplained, which, while concerning, did not inherently suggest foul play. It is not uncommon for individuals to seek the restroom during their final moments, making the bathroom a frequent scene for natural deaths. Despite these initial conclusions, the lack of a definitive cause of death led Dr. Girard to prudently order an autopsy. This decision indicated a degree of caution. Although the death didn't immediately suggest foul play, the absence of clear answers warranted a more thorough examination to understand exactly how and why Bill Harrison died. For Bill Harrison's case, Dr. Timothy Feltis, a pathologist, was tasked with performing the autopsy. He was informed by the coroner that there were no concerns regarding foul play and that the police would not be present at the autopsy to take photographs. This information leading him to proceed under the assumption that Bill's death was not suspicious. This situation was exacerbated by the fact that, at the time, Canada lacked its own forensic pathology training program, leading to a severe shortage of qualified forensic pathologists in Ontario. The revelations from the inquiry significantly impacted the field, coinciding with the launch of Canada's first training program in forensic pathology at the University of Toronto. Additionally, these events spurred the establishment of the Ontario Forensic Pathology Service, marking a significant step forward in addressing the deficiencies in the system and improving the quality and reliability of death investigations in the province. This transformation aimed to ensure that forensic pathologists were properly trained and that death investigations were conducted with the highest standards of accuracy and integrity. However, a fundamental issue persisted. The initial assessments, Bill Harrison's death, shrouded in unusual circumstances, should have raised immediate suspicions. A locked bathroom door, abrasions on his neck. Despite these unsettling details, his death was categorized as non-suspicious, bypassing the thorough forensic scrutiny it desperately required. Instead of being sent to the centralized facility in Toronto for a detailed autopsy, the case was dismissed as a natural death, an oversight that may have allowed crucial evidence to slip through the cracks. This glaring gap exemplified the ongoing systemic failures in identifying and prioritizing cases that merited deeper investigation. When Dr. Timothy Feltis conducted Bill's autopsy, his findings painted a disturbing picture that starkly contradicted the initial determination of a natural death. There were no heart abnormalities, no diseases, none of the usual markers of natural causes. Instead, Dr. Feltis uncovered injuries that defied any benign explanation. Neck abrasions, a significant bruise on the scalp, and the most shocking discovery, a fractured sternum. These findings weren't just unusual, they were deeply alarming. Years later, Ontario's chief pathologist would call the fractured sternum an astonishing finding, one that should have sent investigators racing to uncover the truth. In his attempt to piece together the mystery, Dr. Feltis consulted with the coroner. The neck abrasions were tentatively linked to a thin gold chain Bill had worn, suggesting the marks could have been caused by the chain being pulled tight. The fractured sternum, on the other hand, was attributed to a potential accidental fall. Dr. Feltis speculated whether Bill might have struck a sharp corner during a collapse, with the coroner pointing to the bathroom vanity as a plausible culprit. But this theory was built on shaky ground. Dr. Feltis was never provided with police photographs of the scene, critical visual evidence that could have validated or disproved his hypotheses. Without these images, his conclusions were based on incomplete information, leaving room for critical evidence to remain buried and unanswered questions to fester. Ultimately, Dr. Feltis offered a cautious determination. Bill's injuries might have resulted from a sudden collapse due to an acute cardiac arrhythmia, with a subsequent fall causing the trauma to his head and chest. It was a scenario grounded more in possibility than certainty. The fractured sternum, in particular, stood out as a troubling anomaly that did not align with the standard narrative of a natural death. The lack of definitive medical evidence further underscored the challenges of forensic pathology when working in the absence of comprehensive information. For Bridget Harrison, Bill's widow, the autopsy findings were devastating. Seeing the report months later, she was confronted with the unshakable realization that her husband had been a healthy man with no apparent reason to die. Her brother, echoing her disbelief, told police, "The autopsy basically said, here's a healthy human being. There was no reason for him to die." The family's distress was compounded by the stark contrast between the clinical report and the unanswered questions surrounding Bill's demise. As doubts mounted, so did their grief, a painful reminder of the shortcomings in an investigation that failed to look beyond the surface. The unresolved nature of Bill Harrison's death left a chilling legacy, one that would later intertwine with the unraveling tragedies of the Harrison family. The day after the shock unraveled further when she realized her grandchildren were missing. The truth soon emerged. Melissa Merritt had taken the children, fleeing without warning. For Bridget, this was a terrifying confirmation of her worst fears. Desperate, she turned to the police for help, but their response was frustratingly procedural. They informed her that no legal action could be taken without an updated family court order, delaying any immediate intervention. The bureaucratic hurdles added to Bridget's anguish. Days passed before she could stand before a judge. Finally, on April 23rd, she was granted temporary sole custody of the children, enabling authorities to issue an arrest warrant for Merritt on charges of abduction. Yet this victory came too late to erase the emotional toll of those harrowing days. On May 6, 2009, Bridget found herself in a puzzling series of events. She explained that her son Caleb was incarcerated, leaving her and Bill as primary caregivers for his children. Merritt's dissatisfaction with the custody arrangement had been brewing, underscored by an email she sent to the Harrisons declaring, "If Caleb is not caring for the children, no one other than myself should be." That email would later serve as a key piece of evidence. As Bridget detailed her sudden and profound loss of Bill, she also recounted the unsettling absence of the children from school the morning after his death. With no cause of death yet determined for Bill, the situation grew more complex and emotionally fraught.
Sorry about that.
It's okay. On April the 16th of this year, which is just like 3 weeks ago, my husband died. Completely unexpected. Because of the death of my husband, went to school on Friday and found out they weren't in school. We went by the house, all dark, all locked up. Made me nervous.
The eerie chain of events hinted at a deeper conspiracy, but investigators failed to connect the dots. The investigation into Bill Harrison's death was hampered by a critical lack of information sharing. Dr. Timothy Feltis, the pathologist who conducted the autopsy, was unaware of the broader family dynamics at play when he examined Bill's body. The timing of Melissa Merritt and Christopher Fattore's abrupt departure from Mississauga on the same day of Bill's death was never communicated to him. Had Dr. Feltis been privy to this information, he later admitted, it would have fundamentally altered his approach. Reflecting on the case, he remarked, "If I'd had all the information, I would have done things differently." His admission underscored the devastating impact of fragmented investigations and incomplete communication in death cases. While authorities in Ontario struggled to piece together the truth, Merritt and Fattore embarked on a cross-country escape. Leaving Mississauga behind, they first traveled to Calgary before heading east to Nova Scotia, where they hoped to start over with a lower cost of living. In Nova Scotia, Merritt gave birth to her fourth child, adding another layer of complexity to their already fraught existence as fugitives. Their attempts to stay under the radar seemed calculated. However, despite using aliases to conceal their identities, Fattore made a careless mistake, writing his real name on a rent check. This blunder unraveled their anonymity and set the stage for their eventual capture. It was a small but decisive moment in the unraveling of a conspiracy that had gone unchecked for far too long. Had the connections between Bill Harrison's death, the abduction of the children, and Merritt and Fattore's flight been identified earlier, the investigation might have taken a very different trajectory. Instead, the disjointed approach allowed the fugitives to evade the law temporarily and left the Harrison family grappling with unanswered questions for years. The loss of Bill Harrison cast a long shadow over the Harrison family. He had been a stabilizing force, a calming presence in the midst of family challenges. His absence, especially in the strained relationship between Bridget and Caleb, as grief and stress mounted in the wake of Bill's death. Merritt's release on bail introduced a new layer of tension. The court imposed strict conditions designed to protect her children and enforce legal compliance. But Merritt and Fattore flagrantly disregarded these terms on April 10th, driving to Pitch Pine Crescent and parking near the Harrison home. Though Merritt stayed in the van, Fattore approached Bridget's house under the guise of delivering a letter and photographs for the children. This act, seemingly innocuous, was a direct violation of court orders. The situation escalated when Caleb returned home with the children and spotted Merritt in the van. Alarmed, Bridget immediately called the police. Responding swiftly, officers arrested Merritt for breaching her bail conditions. She spent 3 days in jail, a stark reminder of the chaos her actions had brought to the Harrison family. These events were more than legal disputes or custody battles. They represented the unraveling of a family already stretched to its breaking point. The failures in communication and coordination among investigative bodies allowed critical clues to go unnoticed. Bridget's tireless fight to protect her grandchildren and seek justice for Bill's death exposed a system ill-prepared to handle the complexities of her family's ordeal. Even as the children were returned to Pitch Pine Crescent, the emotional scars remained. Bill's absence continued to ripple through the family, and the ongoing turmoil with Merritt and Fattore loomed large. For the Harrisons, the fight for justice had only just begun, with no guarantees that the system would deliver the answers they so desperately sought. On April 21st, just 1 day before a pivotal abduction hearing, the Harrison residence became the site of yet another tragedy. Caleb Harrison's 8-year-old son returned, his grandmother, Bridget Harrison, lying unresponsive at the bottom of the stairs. Terrified and confused, the young boy ran to a neighbor's house for help, setting off a rapid emergency response. Ambulances and police vehicles once again descended upon the quiet neighborhood, their flashing lights painting a grim tableau eerily reminiscent of Bill Harrison's mysterious death just 1 year earlier. The house, now cordoned off with police tape, had become a site of recurring misfortune. The repeated tragedies involving 2 senior family members under similarly suspicious circumstances deepened the air of unease and demanded a more thorough investigation into the Harrison family's ongoing ordeal. Only days before her death, Bridget had submitted a victim impact statement ahead of Melissa Merritt's expected guilty plea in the abduction case. Her statement revealed the excruciating pain and fear she had endured in the wake of Bill's death and the abduction of her grandchildren. Bridget described this period as the most desperate 7.5 months of my life. While she refrained from making direct accusations, her words hinted at a growing unease about the sinister timing of these tragedies. Bridget's death left the family shattered and thrust their story into a deeper realm of unresolved sorrow. Her balancing act as a grieving widow and determined grandmother had come to a sudden, tragic end, leaving behind unanswered questions and a haunting legacy of grief. The peculiar details surrounding Bridget's death immediately raised red flags for her family. Initially deemed a potential accident, the scene told a more troubling story. Caleb Harrison later described his mother's body as lying face up, arms at her sides, her head resting unnaturally on the bottom stair. Her green eyes were open, frozen in a lifeless gaze, a detail that added a chilling element to an already unsettling scene. The family strongly disputed the theory of a simple fall, arguing that the positioning of her body defied such an explanation. As photos of the scene were later displayed during court proceedings, the emotional impact on family members and friends was profound. For them, the unnatural circumstances of her death solidified the belief that Bridget had been the victim of foul play. When coroner Dr. Robert Boyko arrived at the scene, he immediately noted troubling signs of potential violence: abrasions and bruising on Bridget's chin and neck. These observations prompted him to order a full forensic autopsy to be conducted in downtown Toronto, an investigation far more thorough than the one Bill Harrison had received. This decision acknowledged that might have been involved and offered the hope of finally uncovering the truth behind Bridget's untimely death. As the autopsy findings emerged, the complexities surrounding Bridget's injuries came into focus. Petechial hemorrhaging in her eyes, a hallmark of strangulation, clashed with injuries like broken neck bones that could support a fall. The unusual combination left investigators puzzled about the sequence of events leading to her death. The investigation took a darker turn when Dr. Michael Polanin, Ontario's chief forensic pathologist, joined the case. Upon learning that Bridget's death was the second suspicious fatality within the same household, Polanin drew a chilling parallel to Bill Harrison's unexplained injuries. He noted that Bill's fractured sternum and throat abrasions, which had gone largely unexplored, could potentially be connected to foul play. Polanin also highlighted a procedural failure. Bill's autopsy had lacked a layered neck dissection, a critical examination that might have provided key insights into his injuries. Polanin's proposal to exhume Bill's body for further analysis underscored the urgency of re-examining the past in light of these new findings. Tragically, this avenue was closed. Bill had been cremated, leaving only incomplete records and Bridget's autopsy findings to guide investigators. Bridget's death highlighted significant failures in the investigative process. Peel police policy dictates that suspected homicides should be handled by the Homicide Bureau, whose detectives bring specialized training and expertise to complex cases. Despite the suspicious circumstances of Bridget's death, the case remained with the local Criminal Investigations Bureau instead. The Homicide Bureau's refusal to take over the investigation raised questions about whether all avenues were being properly explored. This decision, shrouded in a lack of transparency, fueled the family's frustration and left critical leads unexplored. Bridget's case, like Bill's before it, risked becoming another unresolved chapter in the Harrison family's tragic saga. Initial suspicions fell on Caleb Harrison, given known tensions between him and his mother. However, Caleb provided a solid alibi. He was at work at the time of her death. With Caleb ruled out, the investigation seemed to lose direction, a common pitfall in cases where initial leads fail to produce results. The Harrison family's suspicions soon turned towards history between the couple and the Harrisons, coupled with the timing of Bridget's death, made them persons of interest. Caleb himself urged police to investigate their whereabouts on the day of his mother's death. When questioned, Merritt claimed she had been at home running a daycare with Fatore, providing an alibi that added another layer of complexity to the investigation. Verifying her story and tracing her movements would prove critical in uncovering the truth behind Bridget's death, a truth that remained agonizingly out of reach as the case unfolded. Bridget Harrison's death presented a complex puzzle for investigators, one that demanded a delicate balance between following family suspicions and establishing concrete evidence. However, the investigation's limitations soon became apparent. Christopher Fattore, one of the primary suspects, provided an alibi that required scrutiny. He claimed to have been running errands and working.
I think it's weird that she passed away like a week after Bill. Like it was almost like a week between the anniversary of, I don't know what you call it, but say the anniversary of Bill passing away. He had passed away for 1 year, and then I think it was almost like a week later that she had passed away. I think that's odd. But, you know, you kind of then when you start thinking about it, it's like, well, it was a year anniversary since her husband passed away. Maybe, you know, like I said, I've heard the stress killed. I've heard, you know, like it can kill you, it can just eat away at your body or whatever. I've been told that because I've been stressed out, you know, since my kids were taken from me, and my doctor's like, you need to take it easy, like, because it'll kill you. Like, I have ulcers now that I'm on medication for. No, like, and again, I don't know how she died. I don't know what she looked like. I don't know if she was assaulted. I don't know if she looked I don't know anything about that. So I don't want to be making any assumptions that he beat the hell out of her and she died, because I don't know. Like, I don't know what she looked like. You know, like if, you know, her face was all bashed in, then maybe it would be a little bit more stronger of a thought.
From a local Sobeys corroborated part of his account, placing him at the store. Yet a critical component of his story, picking up a drum kit from Merritt's grandmother's house, remained unverified. Police failed to interview Merritt's grandmother, missing an opportunity to either confirm or challenge the credibility of Fattore's timeline. This oversight left significant gaps in the reconstruction of his whereabouts during the critical window of time. The investigation into Bridget's death spanned a mere 2 weeks before it was shelved, a startlingly short time frame given the case's complexity and gravity. Months later, authorities officially closed the case, citing insufficient evidence to determine foul play. Yet the lingering questions surrounding her neck injuries, petechial hemorrhaging, and ambiguous cause of death pointed to an incomplete picture. At a final case conference, forensic pathologists presented multiple possible explanations for Bridget's injuries. The findings were conflicting. Signs of potential strangulation were juxtaposed with injuries consistent with an accidental fall. This duality created a fundamental challenge in determining the manner of death. Dr. Michael Pickup, who conducted the autopsy, concluded that neck injuries were the cause of death, but could not definitively classify it as homicide or an accident. His candid acknowledgement that the case cannot hinge on the pathology alone highlighted a critical aspect of death investigations: the need for corroborating evidence from the scene, witnesses, and other investigative leads to form a complete narrative. For Bridget's family, the lack of resolution was devastating. Bill's sister, Elizabeth Gallant, expressed deep frustration over the investigative shortcomings. To her, the inconclusive findings from the autopsy should have prompted an intensified police effort, not a premature closure. Instead, the reliance on limited medical conclusions left the family's concerns unaddressed. Gallant's interactions with Constable Boyer underscored a troubling dynamic. Families, already burdened by grief, often feel they must gather evidence themselves to prompt further investigation. This misunderstanding of law enforcement's role highlighted systemic issues, where the onus appeared to shift unfairly onto the victims' families rather than the investigative team. The final determination that Bridget died of asphyxia with an unknown mechanism of death only deepened the mystery. The ambiguity surrounding her neck injuries, which bore hallmarks of foul play, should have prompted additional inquiry. Instead, the case was quietly closed in 2010, leaving the Harrisons to grapple with the unresolved tragedy. This failure to thoroughly not only denied the family closure, but also represented a missed opportunity to uncover the truth. The procedural missteps in Bridget's investigation illuminated broader issues in law enforcement training and the critical need for officers to recognize and interpret nuanced medical evidence, especially in cases of unexplained injuries or suspicious deaths. The Harrison family's grief was compounded by the knowledge that key evidence had been overlooked and critical leads had gone unexplored. The premature closure of the case left them haunted by what might have been discovered if the investigation had been as relentless as their pursuit of justice. But before they could heal properly, tragedy struck again. On August 23, 2013, Elizabeth Gallant arrived at Pitchpine Crescent to a scene all too familiar. Another life lost, another home surrounded by police tape. This time it was Caleb Harrison, found dead in his home. The sight of yellow tape cordoning off the property, a now recurring symbol of misfortune, underscored the family's cascading tragedies. What was once a quiet loss and unanswered questions. Elizabeth, the steadfast presence during the family's prior losses, now heartbreaking reality of Caleb's death. Her role as a source of comfort and strength became more significant than ever as she shouldered the weight of yet another devastating blow to her family. For the community, this death was a breaking point. Cries of, "How could you let this happen?" directed at the police reflected not just sorrow but frustration. Many questioned the handling of the earlier Harrison family deaths, believing the tragedies could have been prevented if the investigations had been more thorough. Determined not to repeat past mistakes, police launched an intensive investigation into Caleb's death. Officers canvassed the neighborhood, interviewing neighbors, seeking witnesses, and collecting video surveillance. Every possible avenue was explored in an attempt to piece together the events leading to Caleb's demise. The renewed police efforts signaled a significant shift. Acknowledging their previous failures, law enforcement committed to uncovering the truth, not just for Caleb, but for the entire Harrison family. This case marked a critical moment in restoring public trust and ensuring justice for the family. Caleb's autopsy provided the breakthrough the investigation needed. The revelation that he likely died from strangulation shifted the focus to a possible homicide, forcing the homicide squad to reassess the previous Harrison deaths. The injuries and timing of Caleb's death demanded a deeper exploration of motive and opportunity. Detective Sergeant Cowan addressed the complexities of the investigation, referring to the case as a cold case requiring painstaking reconstruction. The lack of rigor in earlier leads left the team with a monumental challenge, but the late involvement of the homicide squad brought renewed hope for resolving the series of tragedies. But while this was ongoing, another problem arose. What was to become of the kids? After Merritt's guilty plea to child abduction following Bridget's death, Caleb was granted sole custody. Merritt retained visitation rights every second weekend, preserving her bond with the children. In the summer of 2013, Caleb demonstrated remarkable flexibility by agreeing to a temporary custody arrangement, allowing the children to alternate weeks with their mother. This decision reflected his willingness to prioritize the children's relationships, even in the face of underlying for shared custody, accusing Caleb of manipulating child support demands to control the arrangement. Caleb's silence on the application indicated his reluctance to alter the existing agreement, believing it was best for the children. When Caleb was killed, the timing was deeply suspicious. His death coincided with the custody schedule reverting to limited access for Merritt, raising questions about motives linked to their contentious relationship. The intersection of custody disputes, financial tension, and past accusations created a volatile backdrop to the unfolding tragedy. Caleb's death not only ended the custody battle, but left his children without their father, further destabilizing an already fragile family dynamic. For the Harrison family, the loss of Caleb was yet another chapter in an unrelenting saga of heartbreak and unanswered questions. As investigators worked to uncover the truth, the children, caught in the crossfire of a fractured family, faced a future forever shaped by the tragedies that had engulfed their lives. Following Caleb Harrison's death, Melissa Merritt wasted no time in filing for sole custody after the tragic event. Merritt submitted her application, describing Caleb's death as tragic and very shocking. This characterization seemed calculated to position herself as a grieving ex-partner, potentially swaying the court's perception in her favor. The custody application was successful, and Merritt was granted full guardianship of the children. With her newfound legal authority, Merritt and her partner, Christopher Fattore, quickly relocated coast. Their move to Nova Scotia appeared to be a calculated attempt to start fresh. However, their every step was closely monitored by law enforcement, hinting at the growing suspicions surrounding their involvement in the Harrison family's tragic saga. The tense atmosphere of surveillance led to action on a bleak January morning in 2014. Half a dozen police vehicles descended on a secluded house in Italy Cross, Nova Scotia, where Merritt and Fattore had lived since November. Officers quickly apprehended the couple, charging them with the first-degree murders of both Caleb and Bridget Harrison. As Christopher Fattori and Melissa Merritt faced the detectives, the evidence against them was piling up, leaving little room for doubt. Cell phone records were placed near the Harrison home at critical times, and then there was the forensic evidence, leading to the murders. At first, Fattori tried to stay quiet, his face stiff and unreadable, while Merritt lashed out, denying everything and deflecting every question. But the detectives weren't giving up. They laid out the evidence piece by piece, slowly boxing the couple into a corner they couldn't escape from. As the hours dragged on, Fattori began to crack. The detective's tone shifted, less aggressive and more probing, painting a picture of the family that had been destroyed and the lives that had been stolen. The weight of guilt and exhaustion started to show in Fattori's posture. His head hung low, his shoulders slumped. Finally, after hours of relentless questioning, he couldn't hold it in anymore. His voice shook as he confessed piece by piece, revealing the terrible truth. The details painted a horrifying picture of what had happened. His confession shattered any hope of innocence and confirmed the devastating betrayal that tore the Harrison family apart. Head in his hands, Fattori recounted the events of April 2010. Under the pretense of delivering a note for the children, he approached the Harrison residence. When Bridget answered the door, he forced his way inside and launched a brutal attack. "I hit her a couple of times," he admitted. His voice cracked as he confessed. "I then proceeded to squeeze her neck." Tears streamed down his face as he continued until she stopped breathing and lay on the floor. Fattori explained his reasoning behind the murder. He believed that eliminating Bridget would help Merritt gain an advantage in her custody battle.
I killed Harrison. I didn't like the way he treated my kids. I didn't like hearing all the horrific stories. It was an awful family. They treated the children like shit. And Melissa had to live with it every day, and I couldn't watch Melissa's attitude and how sorry she was for everything that was going on.
He insisted that Merritt had no role in planning or carrying out the crime. Fattori's assertion involved appeared to be a deliberate effort to shield her from culpability. While this statement could significantly impact Merritt's legal case, it raised critical questions about its validity. Given that Fattori's actions were explicitly tied to the custody dispute, investigators scrutinized whether Merritt may have known about or even encouraged the plan, regardless of his claim to the contrary. Fattori's confession to...
What did you do?
I killed Bridget Harrison and killed Harrison.
How did you kill Bridget?
I knocked on her door. She opened the door. I pretended to have a letter to give to the children. She refused the letter, so I then forced my way into the house and I attacked her.
What did you do?
I hit her a couple times. I then proceeded to squeeze her neck. Until she stopped breathing and laid on the floor. I never meant to find him. I never meant to find her. That's not the plan. That's not what I wanted. I figured that someone would come home or Caleb would come home and find her. I didn't expect for to come to the house. I didn't think that was going to happen.
Bridget's murder marked a turning point in the case, revealing the premeditated nature of the violence that had torn through the Harrison family. 3 years after Bridget's death, Fattori returned to Pitch Pine Crescent under the cover of darkness. Dressed in black mart, he armed himself with a baseball bat. Using a key stolen from Caleb's son, he entered the house, guided only by the hum of a bedroom fan. Upon finding Caleb, Fattori struck him in the chest with the bat. Although Caleb's sudden reaction caught him off guard, Fattori quickly regained control, throwing Caleb into a shelving unit before strangling him. Despite admitting...
And I'm telling you right now that Melissa Merritt did not know anything until after it was done.
To these gruesome details, Fattore maintained that Merritt was unaware of his plans until after the murder. This assertion became a key element of his defense. In the couple's history and the intertwined nature of their lives, the credibility of this claim was heavily scrutinized during legal proceedings. The insistence on Merritt's ignorance of the murders formed a central part of Fattore's defense. Yet police remained unconvinced. Their belief in Merritt's involvement stemmed from her intimate connection with Fattore and the shared context of their relationship. The dynamic between the two, coupled with the calculated nature of the crimes, suggested that Merritt's role might have extended beyond Fattore's narrative.
I left, I went there. I got into his house. Proceeded to go up to the bedroom. I hit him in the chest. And when he sprung up, we began to struggle. I threw him into the shelving unit beside his bed. He tried to bribe me with money. I didn't speak to him. I just knocked him to the ground and I proceeded to choke him.
Fattore's confession, while illuminating, left critical questions unanswered. As the investigation unfolded.
And as for Caleb, I snuck out in the middle of the night. Also had no idea.
Authorities sought to uncover the full extent of both individuals' involvement, piecing together a chilling story of betrayal, violence, and fractured family ties. The aftermath of Caleb Harrison's murder unraveled new layers of evidence and Mississauga, Melissa Merritt and Christopher Fattore left behind several belongings, including a laptop brimming with incriminating internet searches. These searches, discovered in a trailer too dilapidated for travel, provided a chilling glimpse into a calculated plan. The evidence, however, raised questions about why police had not secured search warrants earlier, specifically after Bridget Harrison's death, potentially missing key opportunities to uncover the couple's intentions. Among the most damning searches, 2 months before Bridget's murder. What if a grandparent has legal custody and they die? 3 weeks before Bridget's murder, how long does it take for a person being strangled to pass out? The month before Caleb's murder. Easy ways to kill and get away with it. The laptop's contents were a treasure trove for investigators, yet they posed significant challenges. Both Merritt and Fattore had access to the computer, making it difficult to attribute specific searches to either individual. Police sought to link the queries to activities in their email accounts to pinpoint the user. However, unauthorized searches and seizures of digital evidence during the investigation complicated its admissibility, highlighting procedural missteps that added layers of complexity to the case. Police, determined to strengthen their case, moved strategically. Days after Fattore's confession, officers placed Merritt and Fattore in a room at Halifax Airport, allowing the couple to converse under the false impression they were alone. For 3 hours, their whispered conversation was recorded, a crucial piece of evidence later introduced at trial. This, combined with months of intercepted communications from their Italy cross home, painted a detailed picture of their relationship and potential complicity. As the door closed behind them, Fattore began, "I'm taking the rap for it, to give you an accessory after the fact." Merritt's response revealed a telling concern. "They called me Carla Homolka," referencing the infamous Canadian accomplice to murder. The comparison underscored how Merritt's involvement was viewed. Trial motions, Merritt's defense team argued that police had conducted unauthorized searches and attempted to conceal these actions, while prosecutors insisted the missteps were honest errors amid a complex investigation. Superior Court Justice Fletcher Dawson sided with the defense, identifying instances of police misconduct and efforts to obscure them. Despite this, Justice Dawson acknowledged the importance of the internet searches, particularly queries like, if a grandparent has legal custody and they die, which of the parents gets the kids? He noted the searches likely pointed to Merritt as the planner, given their timing and specificity. On September 27, 2017, the trial began. After 4 years in custody, Melissa Merritt appeared diminished. Her once polished demeanor was replaced by a frail figure with long dark hair, and as a glass of the witness box, she clutched a tissue and tearfully pleaded not guilty. Prosecutors Eric Taylor and Brian Maguire presented a compelling narrative linking the custody battle to the deaths of Bill, Bridget, and Caleb Harrison. They argued that Merritt and Fatore had conspired to eliminate the obstacles in Merritt's custody fight, with Fatore carrying out the murders. She was not just an accessory after the fact, Taylor stated, directly countering the anticipated defense argument. While Fatore faced charges of first-degree murder for Bridget and Caleb and second-degree murder for Bill, he pleaded not guilty to all charges. In a strategic to manslaughter in Caleb's case, citing a lack of intent to kill. The Crown, confident in its case, rejected the plea. During testimony, Fatore claimed his confessions were coerced by his concern for his family, believing a deal would secure Merritt's release to care for their children. He denied involvement in Bridget's death and maintained he only intended to rough up Caleb to buy more time with the children. His assertion of no involvement in Bill's death aligned with his claim of affinity for the patriarch, complicating the jury's perception of his motives. The case against Merritt relied heavily on circumstantial evidence. Prosecutors argued that Fatore's actions were impossible without Merritt's knowledge and support. They highlighted her potential role in driving Fatore to purchase the shoes he wore during police statements. The intercepted conversations added weight to the case. In one exchange, Merritt told Fatore, "You shouldn't have said anything to them," followed by a muffled comment and, "The audio tapes would have ed us anyways." Prosecutors interpreted this as an admission of guilt, while the defense argued it reflected their perception of police bias rather than their culpability. While the custody battle remained central to the Crown's argument, prosecutors added another layer: financial gain. They alleged Merritt and Fatore believed they would inherit millions from the Harrison estate, further motivating their actions. This theory painted a picture of greed intertwined with family betrayal. The physical evidence against Fatore was damning. Caleb's DNA was found under Fatore's fingernails, and gloves containing both their DNA were discovered in Fatore's trash. The Walmart shoes purchased shortly before the murder were also recovered, linking Fatore directly to the crime scene. Dr. Michael Polinen, a key forensic witness, testified that Bill Harrison likely suffered blows to the head and chest before his death. Although inconclusive, Polinen's testimony suggested violence rather than natural causes. Conversely, a defense posed Bill's fractured sternum resulted from CPR, contradicted by ambulance records stating no CPR had been performed. Ultimately, the trial of Melissa Merritt and Christopher Fatore at intersections of motive, evidence, and legal strategy. The prosecution's case, bolstered by digital evidence, forensic findings, and intercepted conversations, painted a chilling picture of a calculated plot to reshape custody dynamics at the cost of human life. Yet Merritt's defense, leaving the jury with the challenge of navigating a web of circumstantial implications and contested narratives. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense as the jury foreman delivered the long-awaited verdicts on a freezing January afternoon. The whispers carried weight far beyond their volume as everyone leaned forward to catch each word. The outcomes of years of pain, loss, and unanswered questions now hung in the balance. Christopher Fatore was found guilty of murdering Caleb and Bridget Harrison, but acquitted of Bill Harrison's murder. Melissa Merritt was convicted of Caleb's murder, though the jury could not reach a consensus on her involvement in Bridget's death, resulting in a mistrial. The Crown subsequently issued a stay of proceedings on the announced their intention to appeal their convictions. Merritt and Fatore received life sentences, each without the possibility of parole for 25 years. Fatore's sentences for the murders of Caleb and Bridget will be served concurrently. Dr. Timothy Feltis, the pathologist who had conducted Bill Harrison's autopsy, reflected on his role with a heavy heart in a post-trial interview. He acknowledged the critical missed opportunities during the initial investigation. "The broken sternum should have twigged me that something wasn't right," he admitted. With years, Bill was the victim of foul play, though he maintained that his conclusions at the time were based on the information available. "I could have done things differently, but I can't change it now," he said, a sentiment that added yet another layer of complexity to an already tragic case. At the sentencing hearing, 25 family members and close friends packed the courtroom, standing as a united front. Their victim impact statements painted a harrowing picture of loss, trauma, and shattered bonds. They described the ripple effects of the murders, which had not only fractured their family, but left emotional scars that would never fully heal. Depression, anger, and violent nightmares plagued the surviving relatives. Images of autopsy photos and imagined visions of their loved ones' final moments. The testimony illuminated the depth of pain inflicted on the Harrison family, leaving the Harrison family home at 3635 Pitch Pine Crescent, once a hub of love and connection, became a tragic monument to their losses. It was sold and completely renovated by its new owners, erasing all physical traces of the family who once called it home. For the surviving Harrisons, the home's disappearance symbolized the end of an era and the irreplaceable void left by Bill, Bridget, and Caleb. A shared sense of guilt and regret lingered among the family members. Many wished they had pushed harder for answers from authorities whose initial dismissals had left. Some expressed fears for their safety, concerned about Merritt's potential influence from prison and the impact she might still have on her children, deepening the divisions within the fractured family. Over 5 years, Caleb Harrison's children endured a series of unthinkable losses. First, their papa, then their nana, and finally their father. Adding to this devastating sequence of events, they witnessed their mother, Melissa Merritt, arrested and later convicted of murder. Despite Caleb's explicit wish in his will for his cousin to assume guardianship, the children were not placed with the Harrison side of the family. Their current guardians remain unidentified. The surviving Harrison family members stood together as Merritt and Fatore were led away by police. The verdicts, while offering a semblance of justice, could not erase the scars left by the murders of Bill, Bridget, and Caleb. Yet the family's resolve remained unbroken. They stood united in their determination to seek accountability for the systemic failures they believed had contributed to these tragedies. "We're not going to back down because we don't want this to happen to any other family," said Doug Blackwell, Bridget's brother, a sentiment that encapsulated the family's enduring fight for justice and closure. Following the tragic saga of the Harrison family, justice came at a heavy cost, but hope prevailed in their determination to prevent such tragedies from befalling others. Yet stories of resilience discover how a 15-year-old girl outsmarted a serial killer, escaping his grasp after a harrowing 18 hours. Her bravery not only saved her life, but led to the capture of a predator. Click on the next video to witness Cara Robinson's incredible story of courage and survival. Our final story follows the life of Chris Coleman, a man who seems to have everything: a loving family, a great job, and a picture-perfect life. But appearances can be deceiving. Behind closed doors, he is hiding a terrible secret. On the morning of May 5, 2009, camera captured Chris Coleman leaving his home heading out for an early workout at a gym located across the river in South St. Louis County. Throughout his time at the gym, Chris Coleman made several attempts to contact his wife, Sherry. He initially called and left a voicemail, followed by a text message. Despite receiving no response, he continued to text her several times. Alarmed by the unusual silence, Coleman frantically calls 911, mainly because he has been receiving anonymous death threats. Now, is this the case of a concerned family man, or are we about to witness the most devastating tragedy in St. Louis County? Let's find out. Born in 1977 to Ron and Connie Coleman, both devout Christian evangelical pastors, Chris was raised in a deeply religious environment. As the quietest and most reserved among his brothers, he was praised during his junior high years for his exceptional kindness, true teamwork, and remarkable temper. Chris's journey took a pivotal turn in high school when a U.S. Marine Corps recruiter's visit inspired him to enlist right after graduation. It was during his time in the Marines that Chris, at the age of 22, attended a K-9 training seminar at an Air Force base in San Antonio. There, he met 21-year-old Sherry Weiss, who was serving as an Air Force military police officer and also participating in the training. Sherry Weiss was born to Angela DeChico and Donald Weiss in 1977 and raised in Cook County, Illinois. In August 2007, just 3 months after Chris and Sherry first met, Chris brought Sherry to meet his parents, introduce her to his parents. The visit, however, went differently than Chris might have hoped. From the outset, Sherry did not make a favorable impression on Chris's conservative Christian parents. Ron Coleman, Chris's father, particularly noted her worldly appearance, short shorts and a leg tattoo, which starkly contrasted with their expectations for their son's partner. Despite the initial disapproval, the couple eloped in Chicago just 1 day after the meeting. Chris's parents later expressed that Chris regretted the impulsive decision almost immediately, describing him as repentant. They soon discovered that Sherry was pregnant, likely accelerating the couple's elope decision. Chris and Sherry welcomed their first son, Garrett, solidifying their new family amidst a backdrop of mixed emotions and rapid life changes. They married soon after, and 2 years later they welcomed their sons. Christopher Coleman secured a position with televangelist Joyce Meyer, largely thanks to a reference from his parents. Televangelist...
How long have you known him?
Since he was a little boy.
And how was that?
His parents came to some conferences that I did over in Illinois. I did a weekly meeting over there, and his mother came to it, brought him with him.
Now, at some point, did he become an employee of Joyce Meyer's ministry?
Yes, he did.
And about when was that?
Probably about 1998.
Okay. So through 2009, he was with you about 11 years, is
Yes.
that correct?
Yeah.
What kind of employee was he? What was his responsibilities there?
He was in the security department.
Was he in general security? Did he move up through the ranks? What happened with that?
If I remember correctly, he started in general security, and then he became the supervisor of that department. And then when a personal security person that I had left our employ, we offered Chris that job, and he took it.
And what did that job entail then? Did he travel with you?
He traveled with us when we did conferences, when we did speaking engagements, and when we went out of the country and did crusades in other countries.
Joyce Meyer, head of a prominent international Christian ministry, brought Chris Coleman onto her security team, and it wasn't long before he became her personal bodyguard. This role came with a hefty salary of $100,000, elevating the Colemans' lifestyle and affording them a comfortable life in a spacious 2-story home on Robert Drive in Columbia, Illinois. Just a short drive from Chris's parents in Chester, the Coleman family appeared to embody a picture-perfect life. Sherry Coleman was a beacon of compassion within her community, actively participating in her faith through volunteer work at the local church in St. Louis, where she and Chris worshipped. She organized trivia night fundraisers to support the needy and was known for her boundless generosity, often giving her money to those she felt needed it more than herself. Sherry was the type of person who would give the clothes off her back and the money from her wallet to help anyone in distress. She believed wholeheartedly that it was her family's calling to extend their help and kindness to others. Chris Coleman's demanding job as a bodyguard for Joyce Meyer, which paid a heft salary, required him to travel frequently, often pulling him away from home for extended periods. This constant absence began to strain his marriage, creating tension between Chris and Sherry as they navigated the challenges of maintaining their relationship and family life amidst his hectic and unpredictable schedule. Despite these challenges, friends and neighbors spoke.
How were you aware that they were having marital problems?
She talked to my son, Daniel.
And did he relate that to you?
He told me so I could talk to Chris about it.
And did you in fact talk to the defendant about the situation?
I did.
And just generally, what was that conversation?
He said that, that they were having issues, that Sherry had told Daniel that...
I'm going to object.
Okay.
Sherry Coleman told anybody.
Okay. Well, my son Daniel told me. Okay.
My son Daniel told her regarding the situation as well.
Although what the defendant told you, you could tell us. What was your conversation with the defendant about the problem?
What he told me is that he felt that Sherry was very controlling, that no matter what he did, she wasn't happy, and that they just in general, were not getting along, and that he was just really tired of it. And at that point I asked him if they'd be willing to get some marriage counseling from a pastor that we have at our office, and right away he said yes, they were willing to do that, which they did do.
Do you know about when that was that he talked to you about that?
It was in the fall 2008.
Chris and Sherry, viewing them as an ideal couple, completing what appeared to be a beautiful family. Even though Chris and Sherry Coleman were attending marriage counseling with a pastor to mend their relationship, their efforts appeared not bearing fruit. A friend of Sherry revealed a text message that showed Sherry discussing the possibility of divorce, indicating that the issues in their marriage might have been deeper and more complex than the counselor emerged for Chris. Sinister warnings, the unraveling mystery of threatening letters. Joyce Meyer is recognized globally as a prominent figure in the televangelist community, admired for her spiritual teachings and charitable work. However, the very nature of her prominence and role as a televangelist can attract scrutiny and criticism. While many people respect and follow her teachings, others are skeptical of televangelists in general, often questioning their motives, financial practices, and the authenticity of their messages. This skepticism can sometimes escalate into outright
Joyce was always getting threats, and he would have to deal with them.
There are so many followers, and sometimes you have followers that turn
condemnation, reflecting broader tensions and debates surrounding religion, media influence, and the commercialization of faith. In mid-November 2008, Chris Coleman received a disturbing email filled with obscenities and chilling threats. It was unusual that the bodyguard was getting threats instead of the main person, but this wasn't just directed at him. The message also targeted televangelist Joyce Meyer and her son. The unsettling correspondence continued, adding to the pressure of his role. As part of his job as the head of security for Joyce Meyer Ministries, Chris was accustomed to dealing with various threats. However, the personal nature of these messages brought an alarming new dimension to the challenges he faced.
I'm aware of any threats that this defendant said he had received against himself or his family.
Yes, he told me about some.
The defendant personally told you that?
Yes.
What did he tell you? What threats did he report?
He told me that he had gotten an email threatening his family if he did not stop working for me. And then he told me that somebody started putting these threats in his mailbox, at which point I think he became more concerned about them, since that meant somebody knew where he lived. He told me that they had taken the information to the police in Belleville, and that he also had a detective that lived across the street from him, and that they were going to make arrangements to put a camera there on his mailbox to see if they could see who was actually doing it.
And you said Belleville. He actually lived in Columbia, is that right?
Well, Columbia, yeah.
That's
I'm
what I
sorry.
thought you meant. When do you think that was, when you became aware of the threats from him?
I think it was probably sometime late March or in April.
Of 2009 then? Yeah. Is it spring? Okay. To your knowledge, had any other employees ever been singled out in that way?
No.
Did you have other employees that provided security as this defendant did?
One other one, yes.
And there wasn't any threats or anything to that person?
No.
Professionally, besides receiving threatening emails, Christopher Coleman also began finding menacing letters in his mailbox. One of the messages read chillingly, "Tell Chris his family is dead. I know his schedule and his family will die next. That macaca will let me talk to Joyce." This explicit threat heightened the seriousness of the situation, underscoring the dire risks, not just to Chris but to his entire family, blending a personal vendetta with professional repercussions. The final letter arrived on the 27th of April, 2009. The letter states that, "I am giving you the last warning. You have not listened to me, and you have not changed your ways. I have warned you to stop traveling and to stop carrying on with this fake religious life of stealing people's money. You think you are so special to do what you do, protecting, or think you are protecting her. She is and not worth you doing it. Stop today or else. I know your schedule. You can't hide from me ever. I'm always watching. I know when you leave in the morning, and I know when you stay home. I saw you leave this morning. I will be watching. You better stop doing. This is my last warning. Your worst nightmare is about to happen." Addressing the threat, the situation had escalated to the point where Coleman felt compelled to seek help. He turned to his neighbor, Detective Sergeant Justin Barlow of the Columbia Police Department. Coleman reported the letters, describing them as another series of warnings aimed directly at his family, heightening the fear and concern surrounding them. In response, local police stepped up patrols around the Coleman home, and Barlow installed a security camera focused on their mailbox. Despite these efforts, the patrols and surveillance camera brought back nothing unusual. The threats persisted in the background, escalating the tension that would ultimately shatter the Coleman family's carefully maintained image. During this same period, friends noticed a change in Chris Coleman's behavior, and Sherry Coleman couldn't shake her suspicions. She confided to close friends that she feared Chris might be seeing someone else. His demeanor troublingly, Sherry went as far as to warn a friend, saying, "If something happens to me, Chris did it." Chris Coleman's statement to police. On the morning of May 5, 2009, while at the gym, Chris Coleman made several attempts to contact his wife, Sherry. He initially called and left a voicemail, followed by a text message. Despite receiving no response, he continued to text her several times. His subsequent messages included, "Are you awake? I know you were tired last night. I have about 5 minutes left on cardio and then I'll be home. Hello, are you up? Finally, time to get the kids up." Each message went unanswered. He went on to complete the cardio workout he referred to and then worked out for an additional 15 minutes. Later, Chris contacted his neighbor, Detective Sergeant Justin Barlow, and requested a welfare check on Sherry and the boys. He also made a call to Columbia Police Department and informed them about the situation. When Barlow arrived at the Coleman residence, he met another Columbia police officer on the scene. The two immediately noticed an open basement window, a detail that hinted at something potentially more sinister. After receiving no response to their calls, the police entered the Coleman home through the basement window. The quiet of the basement gave way as they ascended to the main floors, where they were met with chilling scenes. Disturbing messages were spray-painted on the walls near the kitchen, stark against the backdrop of domestic normalcy. The words "fuck" and "I am always watching" were emblazoned in red. As officers Don John and Barlow continued their search, the sound of the garage door announced the return of Chris Coleman. Barlow instructed him to remain outside, maintaining the integrity of the crime scene. However, it was upstairs that they encountered the grim reality of the situation. Inside, the officers discovered a harrowing sight. 31-year-old Sherry Coleman was found lying naked and face down on her bed, and her two sons, 11-year-old Garrett and 9-year-old Gavin, all deceased and strangled in their beds while Christopher Coleman was away. The brutality of the scene would launch an investigation and 2 years and consume countless hours of police work before justice could be served. The smell of spray paint could be smelled throughout the house. Officer Donjan, upon attempting to check for a pulse on Sherry Coleman, found none. Her skin felt unusually tough and thick. As he tried to roll her over, he noted an alarming rigidity in her body. Her head, shoulder, and arm moved in unison, locked into place, a stark deviation from the softness typically associated with recently deceased bodies he had encountered in traffic accidents. Additionally, Sherry's chest displayed a deep reddish-purple bruise-like discoloration, unlike anything Donjon had seen before in his career, including cases involving jaundice or blood pooling. The grim discovery continued as Donjan entered Garrett's bedroom. There, he found Garrett deceased in his bed, surrounded by an eerie circle pattern of spray paint. Notably, there was also spray paint on Garrett's hand and arm. Similar to his mother, the skin around Garrett's eyes and mouth was discolored, a purple or blue shade, and his neck skin was thick and tough, with a jaundiced and reddish appearance. Detective Barlow subsequently informed Donjan of another tragic finding. Gavin, too, was found dead. In a haunting display, Gavin's body lay in his bed, covered by a blanket with the words "fuck you" spray-painted in red across it. As the officers completed their search of the house, they found no intruders, leaving them to confront the chilling reality that the horror was contained within the family, with no external forces at play. Moments later, Detective Barlow and his colleague emerged to deliver the grim news. His family was dead. After hearing Chris Coleman downstairs asking about the situation, the officers descended and encountered him in a state of confusion. Detective Barlow, faced with the delicate task, informed Chris succinctly that they didn't make it. Upon hearing this, Chris began to cry, his emotions spilling over in the midst of the unfolding tragedy. Officer Barlow noted that Chris asked what had happened, but his inquiries seemed subdued. He did not demand to see his family, nor did he attempt to go upstairs. Instead, Chris followed the officers outside, where he sat on the sidewalk, visibly distraught, and continued to cry. Notably, during this time, no one explicitly detailed to Chris the gruesome scene that had been discovered upstairs. Chris remained at the scene for about 20 to 25 minutes before he was transported by ambulance to the police station. There, a lengthy interview lasting nearly 6 hours was conducted, during which the details of the case began to unravel further, adding layers to the complex investigation of this devastating family tragedy. At one point during the interview, while officers momentarily left the room, Chris Coleman seized the opportunity to pick up and examine one of the officers' notes left within reach. Someone at the scene noticed scratches on Chris Coleman's arm and reported this observation to the officers present. This potentially indicated a struggle or defensive wounds, suggesting a physical altercation. Chris Coleman was asked to provide his account of the events that morning. They would compare his account with forensic evidence, witness statements, and any anomalies noted.
I'll tell you what, from the beginning, let's just start off from when you got up this morning until the time you pulled up at the house. Just kind of walk me through that first, and then we'll go through and kind of explain, talk about some different things as far as the emails you've been getting. Okay?
Well, I set my alarm clock for 5:30 and used my phone for my alarm clock. And got up at 5:30, went in the bathroom, put these clothes here on, and went to the bathroom and basically got in the truck and left. And drove off. I got to I don't know where I was at, but called Sherry to wake her up, get her going, and she didn't answer, of course. And so I went on to the gym, to Gold's Gym, over by Ronnie's Plaza in South County, and started working out. I text her at some point. I might even called her. I don't remember. I could probably look at my phone if you want me to.
Do you guys have a home phone number too, or just cell phones?
We just use cell phones. So I text her, and then she still didn't respond, and probably now it had to have been well after 6 o'clock sometime when I texted her or called her. I'm sure it's still on her phone what time it was. Okay. And she didn't respond. It's not like her because the kids should have been up and stuff, or getting up and going by then, I believe. And so I called her again. On the way back, or when I was getting ready to leave, and she didn't respond again, and started getting a little concerned because it's not like her not to answer the phone. Sometimes she won't answer if she's in the shower, but she always calls me back right away. And so she didn't do that at all. And so that's when I called you.
So what time did you text her back? The second time?
I can tell you.
During the preliminary investigation, such as the scratches on his arm and his lack of tip dress at the scene, Detective went through Chris' phones and saw the text he sent to his wife. Chris Coleman covered only his scratched arm with a blanket provided by an officer after mentioning he felt cold. Chris Coleman's lack of asking apparent questions during the investigation, such as who the killer might be, if the police had checked CCTV footage, or other inquiries typical of an innocent person shocked by such tragic events, raised suspicions among law enforcement and others involved in the case. Typically, someone who discovers that their family members have been tragically killed would show urgent concern about the details of the incident and would be eager to find out what the investigation had uncovered, especially regarding potential suspects or evidence like CCTV footage. During the questioning, investigators delved into various aspects of Chris Coleman's personal and professional life to understand the context of the crime. They discussed the threats he reported receiving. Additionally, the detective probed into his marital life, explicitly asking about any problems he and Sherry might have been experiencing, which he denied. Detectives discovered that Tara Lintz, whom Chris Coleman described as a close and trusted friend, was an old-school friend of Sherry's. Chris had been introduced to her more recently, adding a layer of complexity.
At her condo, she answered the door, and she was visibly upset. I knew right away, I had a gut instinct that she was going to somehow be an important piece of this investigation.
Complexity to their relationship dynamics and potential.
You've been in a relationship with Chris? Since late November, early December.
Where all of you guys been together?
Phoenix and Hawaii, Maui.
What would you tell his wife when he was gone?
He would have just told that he was working.
So Sherry was not aware of the affair that you and him were having?
No. I know she suspected, but proved that, he wasn't sleeping with her or anything.
See, now to us, he tried to paint that it was a rosy, perfect marriage.
No. They never kissed, never hugged.
The investigation. At that time, Tara was living in St. Petersburg, Florida, so Major Shannon Holstead interviewed her there. She admitted to having a relationship with Charis right away. A fractured marriage emerged out of Tara's interview, and digital evidence hinted at a hidden affair. Tara Lintz revealed during the investigation that Chris Coleman had planned to serve Sherry divorce papers on the very day Sherry died. The forensic investigation paralleling the case interviews suggested that the time of death for the victims was well before Chris Coleman left his home for the gym. So the detectives interviewed Chris again.
We've got, when you left the house this morning, was your wife alive?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, what would you say if I told you that I don't think she was?
I don't know what to tell you. I think she was. She was.
Okay.
She was laying right beside me.
And I'm not doubting that. I'm not doubting that you were there, and I'm not doubting that you care. But I am doubting that she was alive when you left this morning. Physically, what we have are different ways to tell how long a person's been deceased. That was done. And what do you think that showed?
I don't know. I guess the time frame when I was gone.
No, you guys wrong. Chris, we need to get this resolved. Okay? That you can't argue with physical evidence.
I'm not trying to argue with it.
All right. What I'm telling you is there is no other explanation. There's no other reason that the information we have would support what you're telling us. That they can't. They can't. You've told us a story and we've gone over it numerous times. Right. You know what? We walk out to Justin, maybe we missed this. Let's go in and talk to him about this and just make sure that we're not missing something. Let's give him every opportunity to tell us exactly what happened and maybe we're missing something. So that's why we go out and we come back in, and we go out and we come back in. I did have to use the restroom, that was legitimate, but we go out and we come back in. And we felt very comfortable that we were giving you every opportunity to tell us something that was going to contradict the information that we had. All right, we've got this information, you're saying it, and we're giving you opportunity to give us something contrary to what you told us before, so that, okay, yeah, all right, that would make sense. That hasn't happened. That hasn't happened. Listen, man, she wasn't alive when you left.
She was alive. She was laying right beside me.
We can go back and forth with this all day long, but the physical evidence doesn't lie. She was not alive when you left this morning. The children weren't alive when you left this morning.
Yes, they were.
No, come on, Chris. We gotta get over this. Now there's reasons, and that's the point we're at. I want to hear the reasons. Now is when we need to find out what happened, man. It's so important. You're at a great point to be able to help us to try to figure this out. We already have it. We already know what happened. We need to know why it happened.
I know what to tell you.
Listen, no, you do know what to tell us.
No, I don't.
Come on, Chris. She was not alive when you left. The children were not alive when you left. You know that's true, and I know that's true.
No,
we need to clear this up now. We need to clear it up now. Did something happen? What happened?
Nothing happened.
What was going on in your life, Chris? Because I can't buy what you're saying. The physical evidence does not lie, Chris. It does not. She was not alive when you left, period. The physical evidence does not lie, man.
What do you want me to tell you? I don't. I'm telling you the truth.
How did we get to this point? That's what I need to know. I need to know how and why we got to the point we're at right now. We both know you're not telling me the truth. We both know that. I've done this a long time. I'm looking in your eyes and I can tell you you're not being truthful. Chris. We need an answer. We have our answers. As bad as this sounds, as bad as this looks, or you may think it looks, we understand, and I've talked to many people who have given me reasons, and it's like, you know what? Okay, all right, I can understand how somebody might have been feeling that at that time. And maybe they acted on it, and they shouldn't have, and they regret it. There's no way to turn clocks back. You can't turn clocks back. You understand that, don't you? Right. You can't turn the clock back. The only thing we can do is go forward from this point, and we need to know what and why it happened. Come on, Chris, help me out with this.
I'm telling you, I've already told you. I told everybody. I told the guy in the ambulance. I told you. I told him.
The more we go back like this, the more it makes me think that there maybe even isn't a good explanation for it. I mean, we need to know what happened. We can't keep going on this. It didn't, she was alive when I left. We know that's not true, and there's nothing we can do about changing that. If we know she wasn't alive when you left this morning, there's got to be an explanation. Now's the time to tell us. Now's the time to get this out of the open.
I don't know what else to tell you.
Yes, you do. Yes,
No.
you do. You have to tell me the truth, Chris.
I'm telling you the truth.
Were you involved in her death?
No.
Okay. Was someone you know involved in her death?
I don't know.
Did you know? Did you talk to anybody about arranging her death?
No, absolutely not.
Okay. You're.
This second interview aimed to confront Chris with the discrepancies between the forensic findings and his initial statements, probing for inconsistencies or admissions that could further clarify his involvement in the murders. Despite the inconsistencies highlighted by the forensic evidence, officers could not charge Chris Coleman with anything. Lacking sufficient immediate evidence to hold him, he was allowed to leave. On May 9, 2009, Coleman's family gathered to lay Sherry, Gavin, and Garrett to rest in Evergreen Cemetery in Chester. Friends and loved ones mourned the tragic loss, but the sorrow was compounded by tension simmering beneath the surface. Days later, Sherry's family arranged for the bodies to be transported to a funeral home in a Chicago suburb for a separate visitation. Notably, Chris Coleman did not attend this service, a decision that deepened suspicions and added another layer of unease to an already heart-wrenching tragedy. As the community mourned, detectives from the Major Case Squad diligently worked to unravel the truth behind the Coleman family's deaths. Their investigation became increasingly focused on Chris Coleman as a suspect. Specialists in computer forensics scrutinized his laptop, searching for digital breadcrumbs that might reveal more about his actions and intentions. Meanwhile, handwriting analysts examined the threatening emails, notes, and menacing spray-painted messages throughout the Coleman home, searching for inconsistencies or matches. Forensic examiners meticulously reviewed police reports and autopsy results. The thoroughness of their investigation extended beyond the home itself to the routes Chris frequented. Notably, evidence was discovered along Jefferson Barracks Bridge, part of the route Coleman would typically use when commuting to and from the gym. However, data from Chris's cell phone indicated an anomaly on the morning of May 5th. He had taken a longer, less usual route home. As investigators dug deeper, a disturbing picture came into focus. A man entangled in an affair with his wife's close friend. Chris and Tara Lintz had taken...
Here in Hawaii.
Sweet day.
Being bad.
Bad?
Video naked dinner.
Taken their relationship beyond simple flirtation, meeting in secret during his work trips to places like Arizona and Hawaii. The two exchanged countless texts, explicit pictures, and videos, keeping their illicit connection alive even as Chris maintained a facade of family life. During discussions with investigators, a friend of Chris Coleman mentioned that Chris often expressed reluctance about continuing his relationship with Sherry, but was unsure of what to do about it. Because if he divorces, he may lose his job. Now, authorities expressed a strong belief that they knew who was responsible for the deaths of Sherry, Gavin, and Garrett. This statement, coming from a senior law enforcement official, underscored the direction of the investigation and the growing case against Coleman. Chris Coleman's parents steadfastly maintained his innocence throughout the investigation. Given the initial information that the bodies were cold, rigor mortis was present, and signs of lividity were evident, Dr. Baden concluded that all three victims were deceased, well before Chris Coleman left the house at 5:43 a.m. He described the determination of the time of death in this case as straightforward, based on the evidence that was needed to pinpoint whether the deaths occurred before or after Chris left. Further analysis of crime scene and autopsy photos and additional forensic reports reinforced his opinion. Notably, Dr. Baden pointed out transfer evidence of hair on Gavin, suggesting that Sherry was strangled first and hair likely transferred via the ligature used on Gavin subsequently. This key piece of forensic evidence shifted the timeline in a way that implicated Coleman directly, aligning with the suspicion that he had staged the morning's events as an alibi. Bolstered by this authoritative opinion, police were confident they had sufficient grounds to believe that Coleman was not just a grieving husband and father, but the perpetrator behind the heinous acts. This breakthrough pushed the investigation towards a critical juncture, setting the stage for legal actions and further unraveling Chris's facade. But in Chris's defense, his father, Pastor Ron Coleman, spoke out.
Sherry at the time wasn't taken care of.
But I don't understand.
Well, I mean, every man's got his desires and every man has to be respected. It's built into every man. If your wife doesn't respect you, then you're going to find respect someplace else.
So are you saying that Sherry was a bad wife?
Just at that short, brief time, she had stepped back from doing her job as a wife.
Out during Crime Watch Daily, he insisted on his son's innocence and controversially dismissed the affair with Tara Lintz, a need that Sherry, Chris's wife, was not meeting at the time. Pastor Coleman's statements about male desires and respect sparked additional controversy by suggesting that Chris sought respect outside his marriage due to perceived shortcomings in his marital relationship. Despite his father's fervent defense and explanations, the evidence gathered by investigators painted a different picture. Chris Coleman was arrested on May 19, 2009, at his parents' home in Chester, Illinois, facing 3 counts of first-degree murder. The arrest came after police concluded that he had attempted to stage the crime scene, spray-painting threatening messages on the walls of his home to create the illusion that an outsider had murdered his family. The police, in their thorough investigation, collected critical evidence from Chris Coleman, including his cell phone, laptops, and DNA samples. Additionally, from Chris' laptop, they obtained detailed personal information about his mistress, Tara Lintz, which included intimate details such as her eye color, clothing sizes, and even the name they had potentially chosen for a future daughter. The document also highlighted a significant entry dated November 5, 2008, marked with the note, "The day Tara changed my life." The trial commenced on April 25, 2011, in Waterloo, Illinois. To ensure impartiality, jurors were brought in from Perry County, a move intended to prevent bias and ensure a fair trial for Coleman. This arrangement underscored the complexities and sensitivities involved in prosecuting a case that had deeply affected the community and drawn widespread attention. During the trial, the prosecution depicted Chris Coleman as a man desperate to escape his marriage and start a new life with his mistress, crafting a narrative where he staged his family's murders to look like the work of a mystery assailant. Dr. Michael Baden's testimony was critical in challenging Chris's alibi of being at the gym when the murders occurred. Further damning evidence came from a computer forensic analyst who demonstrated that the threatening emails, previously thought to have been sent by an unknown aggressor threatening the Coleman family due to Chris's job, were sent from Coleman's laptop using his personal login information. Dr. Baden estimated the time of death to be significantly earlier than when the bodies were found, placing it around or before 3 a.m., based on the observed conditions of the bodies and the rate at which human body temperature typically declines post-mortem. His testimony emphasized that despite potential factors that could slightly alter body temperature, the victims had died many hours before the first responders arrived at 7 a.m. On cross-examination, although Dr. Baden acknowledged that external factors could slightly affect body temperature measurements, he maintained that these wouldn't alter the estimated time of death by more than a degree or two, reinforcing his conclusion that the murders occurred before Chris Coleman's departure that morning. Adding to the mounting evidence, members of the Columbia Police Department, including Detective Sergeant Justin Barlow, who lived near the Colemans, recounted the grim discovery of the murders and the subsequent investigation. Another key piece of evidence was presented by a Columbia detective who found a receipt for red spray paint, like that used to write the threatening messages on the walls of the Coleman home, in Chris's possession. This convergence of testimonies and forensic evidence painted a clear picture of premeditation and deceit, cornering Coleman under the weight of his own actions. Christine, a colleague of Chris Coleman's at Joyce Meyer Ministries, JMM, and a friend of Sherry Coleman, provided crucial testimony about the ministry's employment policies and the couple's personal life. She explained that JMM generally does not allow employees to continue working if they are involved in an adulterous affair, noting that she was aware of at least one employee who had been terminated for such behavior. A lab manager from My Windows and Doors, based in Pennsylvania, provided critical testimony regarding the security features of the windows installed in the Coleman home. He explained that he oversees certification testing for all the company's products, ensuring they meet specific safety and security standards. The basement window of the Coleman residence was a My product equipped with a forced entry resistance plate. This safety feature is designed to withstand attempts at forced entry. If someone tried to open the window while the plate was engaged and locked, it would likely result in visible damage to the mechanism or the window itself. However, upon examination, the Coleman's basement window showed no signs of damage, nor any evidence of forced entry. This testimony was pivotal, suggesting that the window had not been tampered with or used as an entry point by an outsider, which could significantly impact the direction and focus of the investigation, pointing away from the theory of an external intruder. Marcus Rogers, a professor of computer forensics at Purdue University, provided detailed forensic evidence in the case against Chris Coleman. Rogers was tasked with analyzing various digital devices associated with Coleman and others potentially involved, including computers from Coleman's home, a JMM-issued computer, Tara Lintz's computer, devices owned by Coleman's father and brother, several BlackBerry devices, and an AT&T USB air card. Further, Rogers identified that the email address destroychris@gmail.com and documents were produced on Coleman's Dell laptop. Additionally, Rogers testified about the security status of the Dell laptop, noting that the antivirus software was up to date and no evidence of viruses was found when scanned in 2011. This ruled out the possibility of a virus or malware being responsible for unauthorized actions attributed to the laptop. He also confirmed through Windows Registry that there was no trace of virus or malware software installed on the system, further solidifying the evidence that the laptop's activities were directly controlled by the user, presumably Coleman. This testimony was crucial in countering the defense's argument that Coleman's computer might have been hacked or used by someone else, thereby reinforcing the prosecution's case that Coleman himself was responsible for the incriminating activities conducted through his devices. Carla Heine, a detective with the Columbia Police Department, testified regarding financial transactions. During the investigation, a MasterCard credit card was found within the Coleman residence. Following this discovery, police obtained a subpoena to access the transaction records associated with this card. Detective Heine carefully reviewed the credit card records and identified a significant purchase: a can of apple red Rust-Oleum Painter's Touch spray paint. This specific item was bought on February 9, 2009, at 1:46 p.m. from the Handyman True Hardware store located in St. Louis, Missouri, which is about 7.5 miles from the Coleman residence. Chris Coleman denied having any new spray paint in the house, claiming only to possess what he previously...
Now, I have to ask you, if the defendant were having an affair, if you had known that at the time, and I understand you've testified that you didn't, what effect would that have had on his employment?
If he would have been having an adulterous affair while he was still married, then it could have definitely affected his job.
Okay. Were there persons over the years that were terminated in situations like that?
We had situations where they were, yes.
Now I have to ask you about the distinction here. What if it was a divorce as opposed to an adulterous affair?
Each situation is handled totally separately based on the circumstances. We have many people that work for us that have been divorced, and a person is not necessarily, do they lose their job because they get a divorce. It wouldn't have been the divorce so much as the immorality.
So for instance, if a person in your employment, if their spouse filed for divorce against them, and perhaps they had little control over that, you might leave them in your employment? That's a possibility?
Certainly.
Okay, and on the other end of the spectrum, if a person was having an adulterous affair and then filed for divorce from their spouse to be with that person, then their employment may have been terminated.
May have been, yes.
Okay. Do you think there was any situations of that in the past where someone was actually terminated under those kind of circumstances?
I believe so.
Obviously had. However, discovering the same color of spray paint, apple red candy, at his home, matching the paint purchased in February, intensified suspicions. His boss, Meyer, testified that Chris Coleman might have faced termination from his job due to his explicit relationship with Tara Lintz if she had been aware of it. She noted that while her ministry did employ divorced individuals, Coleman's job could have been in jeopardy had she known about his infidelity, indicating that his position demanded a certain moral standard. Tara Lintz's testimony was central to the prosecution's case. Ordered to travel from Florida for the trial, Lintz detailed her relationship with Coleman that began in November 2008. She recounted that she and Sherry Coleman had been best friends in high school and had maintained their connection over the years. Tara was familiar with Chris, but noted that their relationship took a romantic turn in November 2008. This shift coincided with a Joyce Meyer Ministries JMM conference held in Florida, where Tara resided. It was Sherry who encouraged Tara to attend the conference. Following the conference, Tara and Chris began communicating frequently, engaging in constant phone calls and text messages. The relationship escalated to a physical level in mid-December 2008. Tara detailed how their first physical encounter occurred when Chris was in Florida to drop off Joyce Meyer, who was embarking on a cruise. Taking advantage of the situation, Chris met Tara at a hotel in Orlando, marking the beginning of their physical affair. This testimony highlighted the dual life Chris was leading, juxtaposing his role within a religious organization against his clandestine relationship with Tara. She also disclosed that Coleman had given her a promise ring and had plans to divorce Sherry, aligning with the timeline of the murders. Lintz's account provided a motive for Coleman wanting to eliminate his family, his desire to start anew with her, unencumbered by his current marital and familial obligations. The defense, on the other hand, proposed an alternative theory, that an unknown hacker had accessed Coleman's computer to send the threatening emails and that an intruder had committed the murders on the morning of May 5, 2009. They suggested that Coleman was framed, emphasizing the lack of direct evidence, placing him at the crime scene at the time of the murders. Chris Coleman chose not to testify, leaving the jury to weigh the evidence presented by both sides. His decision not to stand highlighted the case's complex defense, relying heavily on technical doubts about the prosecution's narrative rather than a direct refutation by Coleman himself. The contrasting narratives presented a challenging scenario for the jury, tasked with deciphering whether Coleman was a calculated murderer or the victim of an elaborate framing. The trial, spanning 9 days, left an indelible mark on all involved.
A judge sentenced convicted murderer Chris Hayes to life in prison without possibility of parole today, instead of sentencing him to death.
The penalty phase of Coleman's trial was expected to take days, but it took just hours instead after Coleman waived his right for the jury to decide his fate.
Encapsulating themes of betrayal, the facade of a public life, and the dark undercurrents within personal relationships. The jury's verdict on May 5, 2011, exactly 2 years after the murders, marked a poignant conclusion to a deeply distressing case. After 15 hours of intense deliberation spread over 2 days, the jurors found Chris Coleman guilty on all counts. The decision was not reached lightly, as some jurors initially struggled with the evidence presented. Juror Kim Ferrari's recounting of the deliberation process reveals the complexities and emotional toll of their task. Initially, she believed that the jury might end up hung due to the discrepancies in evidence and the need for incontrovertible proof. However, a pivotal discovery changed the course of their decision-making. During Chris Coleman's trial, the prosecution sought to admit text messages and conversations between Sherry and her friends as critical evidence. The defense, however, argued that these messages constituted hearsay and violated Chris's Sixth Amendment right to cross-examine witnesses. In a compelling counter-argument, the prosecution contended that Chris forfeited his right to confront Sherry in court by killing her. This line of reasoning emphasized that any opportunity Chris might have had to challenge the assertions made in the messages was nullified by his own actions, assuming his guilt. The decisive moment in the jury room came when Kim Ferrari and her fellow jurors uncovered photographs that effectively sealed Chris Coleman's fate. This evidence swiftly brought their deliberations to a conclusive end, as recounted by Ferrari. Despite her readiness and the jury's inclination to impose the death penalty, Coleman chose to forego a jury sentencing, opting instead to have Judge Milton Wharton decide his fate. Chris Coleman was sentenced to 3 life prison terms without the possibility of parole for the murders of his wife, Sherry, and their 2 sons, 9-year-old Gavin and 11-year-old Garrett. Ferrari expressed relief at the outcome, highlighting the psychological weight of a life sentence. Coleman would have to live with the memory of his actions for the rest of his life. This perspective was particularly resonant given the timing. Just 2 months prior to the trial's conclusion, abolished the death penalty, rendering any discussion of it largely symbolic. Ultimately, Coleman was incarcerated at Pontiac Correctional Center in Illinois. However, due to concerns for his safety, likely stemming from the nature and notoriety of his crimes, he was later transferred to Dodge Correctional Institution in Waupun, Wisconsin. Despite an appeal for a retrial in June 2011, a judge denied his request, affirming his life sentence and further cementing his fate to reflect on his heinous actions behind bars indefinitely. The tragic story of the Coleman family took another somber turn in December 2012 when the bodies of Sherry, Gavin, and Garrett were exhumed from Evergreen Cemetery in Chester, Illinois, and moved to Sherry's hometown near Chicago. Chris Coleman's parents, Ron and Connie, argued fervently for the right to keep their grandchildren and daughter-in-law nearby, asserting that they had an equal claim to proximity with their deceased loved ones. However, the court ultimately ruled against them, deciding that Chris Coleman, as should not maintain control over where his victims were laid to rest. Despite the relocation of Sherry and her sons, Ron and Connie were not allowed to move the original gravestone to Evergreen Cemetery. As they claimed his stone, paid for by Ron and Connie Coleman,
Tonight, the effort to get Christopher Coleman a new trial in the Metro East continues. Coleman was convicted in 2011 of strangling his wife and 2 kids in May of 2009. Late today, a judge in Monroe County decided another hearing is needed to explore whether Coleman's representation was effective. Coleman's argument is that some evidence was not used during his trial. He's currently serving 3 life terms.
Stands as a poignant reminder of the deep divisions and enduring grief that follow such a profound tragedy. Amid this familial turmoil, Chris Coleman and his legal team continued to challenge his conviction and life sentence with multiple appeals, but faced significant roadblocks. In January 2015, a judge upheld the initial ruling, reaffirming Coleman's conviction and sentence. Despite these setbacks, Coleman publicly maintained his innocence, claiming he was set up during an April 2018 interview with Crime Watch Daily. During the interview, Coleman suggested that a crucial piece of information was overlooked during his trial, that he owned 2 laptops, one of which he traveled with and the other left at home or the office, that the computer linked to the threatening emails was the one he did not carry, implying that someone else could have accessed it and sent the threats. Chris's attorneys filed a request for a new trial in April 2018, arguing that the discovery of extra photos by the jurors, which played a decisive role in his conviction, constituted improper evidence. This argument led to an evidentiary hearing in March 2019 to review the proceedings. However, in July 2020, the judge ultimately denied the appeal for a new trial, maintaining that the conviction and life sentence should stand, closing yet another chapter in the ongoing legal saga surrounding this tragic case. The Coleman family home on Robert Drive, where the tragic events unfolded, has changed hands twice since the murders in 2009. According to information from Realtor.com, the house is currently off the market. Properties with such a notorious history often carry a stigma that can affect their value and desirability, leading to varied interest from potential buyers. The sale history reflects the complex relationship between real estate and its associated past, especially when marked by high-profile criminal events. The tragic tale of the Coleman family continues to echo through the community, a somber reminder of the profound impact of domestic violence. The gravestone, a lasting memorial paid for by Ron and Connie Coleman, stands as a poignant symbol of the unresolved grief and division that follow such heartbreaking events. And that wraps up 3 cases with twists that no one saw coming. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us which story shocked you the most.